Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel. You're watching TechStrong TV. Today's Thursday, July 30th. Thanks for joining our show. Hope you guys are all well, safe, productive. We keep moving through here. This will be our last news show for July. Tomorrow is Friday, and we'll show a previously recorded version of TechStrong TV as we do on every Friday and Wednesday. So this is the last show for July. We started TechStrong TV now. It's about July, June, May, April. We're a solid 4 months in. I think we started right before April 1st. And it's been a blast. It's been a blast doing this. We love doing it. We love meeting the people that we've been meeting with our interviews and stuff, and not just me, but our whole team here at Media Ops. We hope you've enjoyed some of the news and interviews and information and content that we've brought your way. We have a lot of plans to continue bringing new, fresh content and new, fresh formats for you. So we have some nice announcements next week, actually, about some new things, and we've also debuted the CISO Talk, but really not next week, the week after will be the first sort of official CISO Talk panel show. It's about 45 minutes. It'll be part of TechStrong TV. Really looking forward and getting feedback from you guys on that. We also have a new show that's going to be out, I think, August 6th, called DevOps Unbound, which will also be part of TechStrong TV and Digital Anarchist, and that's a really great show too. So, and we're working on a third one as well. Hope to have more information for you soon for you. But for now, let's talk about today. It's an exciting day here. I've got some decent people for you to meet. The first person we're going to interview comes to us from GetLab. A lot going on with GetLab. They have their huge GetLab Commit virtual event, which we are involved with them, and doing a bunch of interviews on that one now. But this isn't about GetLab Commit, though. It's with Jason Yavorska, who's in their product team there. And Jason's a long time, product guy working back in Microsoft on Windows 98 in the day. So it's not his first rodeo. And Jason and I had a great conversation on speed versus quality. And, that was the promise of DevOps, is that you can have it all. But you got to do it right to do it, and it's a delicate balance. So we're going to talk to Jason about that. Then after that, I'm happy to talk about a new company that was recently launched called ObserveIQ. And I speak with Mike Kelly, who's co-founder CTO over there. ObserveIQ is actually a spin-off from Blue Medora, right? Blue Medora sold significant assets off, and but took what they had left, which was around an open source log agent, and spun up what is now called ObserveIQ. But it really, goes to the heart of some of the things that the team at Blue Medora and now ObserveIQ were trying to accomplish. And they think they can make a real change in the observability market, which is, a word we've been buzzing around here lately, but let's hear what Mike Kelly has to say about that. I thought that was a good interview. And then lastly, last for me anyway, for today, is an interview in the continuing series I have had the pleasure to do with my friend Liz Zalman. Liz is the CEO of Strong DM. And when I think about Strong DM and strong women, Liz is great. I mean, this is a gal who is the CEO of this company. But you know what? She started when they were small doing tech support with her customers. So she knows her customers from actually doing support with them. She's technical enough. She's a business savvy, and this is one of 5 interviews Liz and I have done with some companies that use Strong DM. This one is with Software.com, and we're happy to be joined by Mason McLeod of Software.com. So it's Liz, I, and Mason, and great interview. I think you're going to enjoy it. Then we're going to go to something old, right? And as we've been doing for the last 2 months, it's going to come out of TechStrong Con, and it's Tiffany Jaka. Tiffany is, of course, with Harness, and it's your guide to continuous delivery. An important topic. Someone once said DevOps is the symptom, and continuous delivery is the cure. So check that out. I'll be back after Tiffany's presentation from TechStrong Con to give you the news, what's happening around the media ops community today. DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal. Then we'll turn things over to our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon. Charlene has a interview today with John Torr of Cloudian. How organizations can be more effective can be more effective fighting against ransomware. Ransomware is something that's really, we've spoken about it before. It used to be a nuisance. It's more than a nuisance. It's a bit of a pandemic itself, and we need organizations to do better with that. After Charlene will also give us a webinar preview for what we have in store for the rest of this week, as well as an early look at next week's webinars on media ops, and we have some great ones there. After that, I'll be back to introduce Mitchell Ashley, CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group here on the Analyst Corner. And then it's Thursday, and every other Thursday we try to run Jane Explains. It's my partner, Jane Grohl, from the DevOps Institute, Humans of DevOps. And Jane has a great Jane Explains this week, and you can check it out. And then I'll be back to wrap things up. So sounds like it's going to be a good one here today on TechStrong TV. Let's take a quick break for a commercial, and we'll be right back with our first guest. As I said at the top of the hour, our first guest today, or at the top of our show, it wasn't really at the top of the hour, unless you turn this on at the top of the hour. But our first guest today is Jason Jaworska of GetLab. Jason's been in the development game community for years now, many years, let's say 25 plus years. And he's presently in the product team at GetLab, director there, and we had a really good conversation with Jason about speed versus quality, striking the balance. How can you do both? And for me, that was one of the attractive things about DevOps is, as counterintuitive as it may sound, the faster we go in DevOps, the higher the quality we can potentially have, and security for that matter. But of course it's a delicate balance. You need to kind of know what you're doing a little bit. So Jason and I had a great conversation around that, and here it is now, my conversation with Jason Jaworska of GetLab.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this segment of TechStrong TV. For this segment, we're going to be joined by Jason Jaworska of GetLab. Jason, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks, Alan. It's great to be here.
It's nice to have you. So, Jason, our audience is very, very familiar with GetLab, and for good reason. But they're not probably familiar with Jason Jaworska. So why don't you give us a little bit of your background and your position with GetLab?
Sure. So I'm the product director for CI/CD here at GetLab. I've been at the company for a couple of years now, and my whole career has basically been in build and release engineering and DevOps and CI/CD, going back quite a long time. To date myself a bit, the first job that I had was as a build engineer on Windows 98 using CVS, and I think we were using Cruise Control back then, or I'm not even sure which tool it was back then, but I kind of
one of my favorite Windows releases, I have to tell you the truth. But to date myself, I remember waiting online at midnight for Windows 95 when it came out, because it was, to really date myself, I came off of OS2 Warp to go to Windows 95 because I was an OS2 user for years before that. I didn't let, the pre-95 interface for Windows was elementary to say the least. And OS2 Warp was, I mean, Windows 95 looked more like Warp than anything that Windows had done, or it looked more Mac, to truth be told. But yeah, I remember those years, man, very well, very well. Good stuff. So look, I mean, here's the good news, though, is you know, being at GitLab and the product director for CI/CD, you're having a real impact on, you know, what the next generation of folks are building and the tool they're using to help build these apps. You know, especially with COVID and everything going on, we're living on apps and we're living on the internet, and you know, it's where Windows 98 probably had what, a 95% market share eventually, right? And but in some ways, what you're doing now may be even more important. So anyway, good stuff. So Jason, what I wanted to talk to you about today was really about, you know, to me, one of the at the very heart of why DevOps, right? And the premise of, and it's almost counterintuitive, that by going faster, we could be better, right? Because people would say you got to go slow to improve quality. And you know, you want to make sure you finish all of your testing cases, and you want to really, you know, go slow but get the quality right. And one of the things that originally attracted me to DevOps was the idea of, no, that's wrong. If we could automate more and go faster, we'll actually improve quality. And with feedback loops and iterate, release, we'll improve quality faster. What's your take on that one?
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, I've been around for a while, and I remember those days when it was like, we got to slow down, we got to bring in more quality people, and we got to spend more time in quality. We got to plan all this stuff out and be more thorough in our testing. And there was somebody came along at one point, and it was like, well, what if we just did the hard things until we got really good at them? And so that's where we got to. What if we continuously integrated to master, for one, or what if we continuously deployed to production? And your initial reaction is like, wow, that sounds incredibly hard, but and risky. But once you start doing it,
more than hard, risky as hell.
Exactly. And you find that you can build a little bit of structure in place there, and you can actually go much faster in a safe way still. And so, yeah, DevOps to me has been the journey of kind of exploring the promise of that idea. Is if you do the hard things and you do them with some rigor and some mindfulness, that you'll get to great results.
Sure. I had this conversation with a longtime tech executive the other day, and we were talking about sort of pre-DevOps release cycles. Maybe you release twice a year or whatever, right? Or once a year. But it was getting to the point, Jason, where the actual development, let's say in a 6-month release cycle, you spent maybe 2 months actually developing, if you will, writing code, right? But then it would take 3.5 months and you wouldn't even be able to finish your whole test, script, your whole test case load. Right? But it would throw off enough fixes and revisions that it put your release date in jeopardy, because you only had another 15 days, 2 weeks to fix everything that you're seeing in testing, and then maybe retest it one last time if you can, but often there wasn't. I mean, there just wasn't enough time to get a 6-month release out the door when testing was going to take 3.5 of those months.
Yeah, well, you'd have the code freeze at 3 months, and then you'd start doing RCs once a month for the last 3 months. And
right. I mean, it was, it was a crazy way of doing it. But if I would have, transport myself back, Terminator style, into that engineering team meeting and say, guys, you're doing it all wrong. We're going to release 3 times a day, 5 times a day, right? And we'll MVP and and just keep iterating and fixing and getting more and adding incremental stuff to this.
Yeah.
they would have rode me out of, they would have tarred and feathered me first and then rode me out of town. You know, it was like I was crazy. But yet that's where we are now in CI/CD, right?
Yeah, I think what we discovered, and if I did my best to try to explain to me back then, it would be that the complexity as you get as the release grows larger and larger is exponential. And so those 3 months that you're spending on trying to validate everything works together, if you'd have broken it out into smaller chunks along the way, the amount of time you'd had to spend testing would have been smaller on each chunk, and it wouldn't have added up to the same amount of time as the 3 months of testing, because there's just fewer relationships between things. And yeah, that would, but we probably would have got run out of town for sure.
Yeah, you too. We all would have. Let me throw, you know, for those who think the idea of going faster gets you more quality may already be crazy enough, let me throw one other thing that I think DevOps brings to the table, or at least the promise of it. I don't know if we're there yet on this one, and I'm interested to hear your opinion, is not only can we do more faster with higher quality, but we could also improve the security by doing so as well, right? So, you know, I really want my cake and eat it too. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's true. The quality of testing tools for security has really just, there's more tools today than probably even existed. It's more than 5 years ago, you know, probably, that do all kinds of interesting things around license management, container scanning, dependency analysis, and chain of custody, and like all of these interesting angles of looking at security. And they do it all in an automated way, that it just kind of happens during your pipeline. And so, yeah, I mean, looking back again, the way we used to do things, it was that you just kind of hope for the best, right? And you followed best practices, and you tried to use secure code, and you tried to build on secure code. But now you can be a little bit faster, and having all of these checks in place that are automated let you kind of go, but still have the confidence that you're not really screwing anything up.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, two things really pop out to me. Number one, and you know, it's been out a while, but I remember when sort of fuzzing first started, right? And of course, this is something GitLab is working on with their DevSecOps portfolio. And so, you know, the idea of fuzzing where you can test for a variety of things without even really know what you're testing for, right? I mean, what you're testing for is security, obviously, but you didn't need the precision in the for a particular exploit or a particular thing you're looking for. You fuzz it and see what kind of pops up that, you know, may be vulnerable there. I think the second thing is the idea of shifting left this testing, right? You know, I spent 15 years in cyber, Jason. The idea of a company that would test existing applications and infrastructure, you know, more than twice a year was, I'd want to kiss them, right, if they would do that. Now, you know, we test, you know, it's a majority. The last real survey I saw was 75%, but I bet you it's going to be up near 85, 90% of code is tested for security prior to release now.
I would agree with that. And I think it's been a forced multiplier to have the, to shift left. It's because there used to be sort of an adversarial relationship, or at least like
to say the least,
security testing and developers, because it was like they would show up late in the cycle and say you need to change fundamental things about what you've built. And so it was very expensive and sort of miserable, and shifting it left has made the relationship much more positive. And I think that's where a lot of these tools are coming from. It's security researchers and developers working together to build. Working together.
No, look, I do a DevSecOps event at RSA conference every year for the last 5-6 years. And the idea behind it was to bring the security community with the DevOps tribe. And when I first started, there wasn't a lot of love lost there. But it's come together really nicely. Another big, I think, game changer, though, Jason, has been the open source, right? And GitLab, of course, is a poster child here, right? GitLab itself is open, right? Or a lot of what you guys do is open core, open source, but it also talks to the software composition analysis, right? The amount of open source components that get put into modern applications. It's the majority of the code in an app. And so that allows you, I think, to go faster as well, because you're dealing with known quantity, known entities, if you will.
Yeah, a lot of stuff for a long time for a lot of companies ends up being kind of gluing together components that are out there and technologies that are out there and building a unique solution with them. And yeah, open source is really, really great for that. Open source is, I'm a huge believer. It's wonderful in so many ways. As an open source company, we have an open backlog as well. So we have customers participating in our planning process. And, I worked for other companies where planning was private, and just that one aspect alone, even if nobody ever contributed a line of code, being able to talk to customers openly, transparently before we ship anything has increased the quality of what we deliver hugely, and it really drives innovation. And my recommendation to any company out there is open source your backlog, if nothing else.
Probably a little different than your days at Microsoft working on Windows 98.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Slightly different attitude towards open source then.
Especially back then.
No, back then. Now Microsoft, they're all for open source, right? I mean, obviously there's been a huge change there, but back then it was very much a different story.
Slackware Linux desktop while I was working at Microsoft.
Oh, that would have been grounds to get fired. Are you kidding? That was interesting days, interesting times. So certainly, I think open source. I think another thing that's enabled this move to combine quality with speed is the advent, quite frankly, of repositories like Git.
Yeah.
Right.
The idea that I could put my code in here, my colleagues can collaborate with me in real time. We could test it while it's in there. So, it goes towards this whole developing this pipeline, this factory, if you will, right? And Git actually kind of serves as the assembly line floor, if you will, or the vehicle that the code moves along in. Right, as it gets into that CI and then CD, and out the door. So, when we look at what are the enablers, it's open source. It's things like repositories, Git. It's shift left testing, and then I think probably the other biggest thing is automation, automated both testing and delivery, which again is something you guys
Yeah.
Involved in there.
For sure. That's all really, really great points. And to continue on the topic of shifting left, I think testers and developers used to have a more adversarial relationship than they did in the past.
Absolutely.
There's been a ton of really great open source tools, and yeah, I'm sure everybody is sort of aligning on Git and not having this proliferation of different source control systems and then the whole stacks that are built on top of them as they used to be, has made it so that it's easier to write tools that do powerful things on top of it. So we're getting great tools in the security space, but we're also getting really interesting things that shift left the testing. So a good example is I work with some companies who are doing things like they run every single test on like a massively parallel cluster, and they just basically throw money at the speed versus quality problem.
It's always nice to have money, right? So
it's nice to have money.
Yeah, rich or poor, it's nice to have money.
But the teams that are innovating, that are doing things that don't require that much money, are doing things like dependency analysis and risk analysis, and even things around like ML and statistical analysis around the kinds of failures and flaky things that happen in order to run the most likely to fail tests first, so that you get results quicker, even if you're still kind of running a little bit of a longer pipeline. You're, as a developer, getting the most important feedback at least very, very quickly. And that kind of stuff is really innovative. We had nothing like that back in the day. And
No, you had nothing. No doubt about it. I mean, there's different. So all sounds great. Let me rain on the parade a little bit, Jason, here, and get your thoughts on this one, because this is another. This is obviously an area I'm interested in, and we talk to a lot of people about. So you brought up past adversarial positions between security and developers, testers and developers. Right, a lot of developers thought testers were just people who weren't smart enough to be a developer. Right, so they were like junior developers with testers, and that it wasn't its own profession. Security people are the people who say no, right? And so what we've done though is with all of this, we shifted left, and we've got the developers now being partly responsible for running the security testing and then taking the results and making the changes accordingly. We've got the developers running automated, in many cases open source testing, right? Working with the testers, but it's the developers who are doing that. We've made the developers release engineers, right? To a certain extent, a lot of developers, as part of that CI/CD process, are actually release engineers. They're the ones pressing the button, or the DevOps team, pressing the button. Have we really just put more and more on the developer's plate? Right? Shifting responsibility for things that was solely the QA fault, QA, domain, that were really just the security people. By putting it on the developer's plate, are we concentrating too much power and control on the developer, and are we overburdening the developer and getting away from them doing what they do best, which is writing code?
Yeah, great question. I would see it less as kind of that the QA folks and the security folks have disappeared and it's moved on to developers, as that it's expanded who can be a developer. And I would say a lot of those QA folks have learned some development skills and become a developer. And yeah, maybe they're not like full stack engineers who can build everything, but they bring something incredibly value to the developer role, which is the understanding that they have of the QA perspective of security or whatever perspective that they bring. So I would say that rather than developers kind of staying as they are and getting more responsibility, the who is a developer has grown. And so I'm sure there's scenarios where developers sort of got everything dumped on them and weren't quite ready for it. And that you could totally imagine how that could play out. But I think at the macro level, it's really been just kind of a growth of the people who can contribute technically. At GitLab, we have everybody contributing to Git. I mean, even our, I don't even mean even, but like our people ops people contribute to Git, and our product managers write code that runs our website and things. So this is all sort of blurring together these days. And they're not expected to be, top tier developers, but they do bring something unique to the table and to create this hybrid role. And that's I think the main thing that's happening. The other thing is that the tools are just getting so much better. So as a developer, the load of having to say, if you were given the problem of, go tackle security testing, now you can find tools that sort of tie it all together for you. There's good best practices out there. They're open source. You can assemble them together in your pipelines, and it more or less works. And it's a little hard. It's not hard to get yourself into trouble, but it's easy to get started, maybe is the right way to put it.
Excellent. And that's, if you can't beat them, join them, right? And that's a really inclusive message, Jason. I like it. Hey, we're about out of time, man. I want to thank you for coming on and joining us here. Great discussion, good stuff. Keep up the great work on the CI/CD product there at GitLab. It's a kick butt, and we'll look forward to the 22nd. Is today the 22nd? We recorded this. Isn't it release day over there?
It is, yeah.
Very cool. All right, we're gonna have to have someone give us the lowdown on this month's release. But for now, Jason Jaworska, product director CI/CD over at GitLab. Thanks for joining us on TechStrong TV, Jason. We'll have you back on soon.
Thanks so much, Alan. Great time.
All righty. Hey, this is Alan Schimmel, TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest. I always enjoy interviewing recent, launched companies coming out of stealth or launching. There's just an excitement that you get when you start up your company, and this next interview is no different. I speak with Mike Kelly, who's the co-founder CTO for ObserveIQ. ObserveIQ took a little different path than other startups. It's actually a spin-off. The folks at Blue Medora had sold some assets off, and they took what they had there, which was around an open source log agent, and spun up what they're calling ObserveIQ. They think that they can make a huge change in the observability market, which of course, whether you call AI ops or APM or log management, now observability seems to be the big word. So here's Mike Kelly from ObserveIQ around their launch.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another session for TechStrong TV. I'm really happy to introduce a new company to you today. My guest is Mike Kelly, who is the co-founder CTO of ObserveIQ. Hey Mike, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hey Alan, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you. Great to have you on. So Mike, ObserveIQ, yes, it's a new company, but it's not your average new company in that there's a little bit of history here. I'm going to ask you to share it with our audience, and maybe as part of that, Mike, you could talk about your own background and how you came to be a co-founder here at ObserveIQ.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think that's a great place to start. ObserveIQ launching yesterday, but comes from company Blue Medora, which I've been a part of for almost 8 years. And Blue Medora has been in the metric monitoring, log monitoring, observability space for that entire time, primarily focused on, we built integrations that are used across platforms, whether they were on-prem monitoring and management software like we did for VMware, that was a major component of the business, or cloud offerings like a partnership that we still have with Google. What our goal has always been is to expand what these monitoring platforms are capable of. So if you have a platform, typically it's focused on one thing, right? It does one thing really well. And those customers, they use it and they're passionate about it. Now they want to use it for everything inside their IT stack, whether it's monitoring servers, network gear, or their cloud infrastructure and their applications. So that's kind of where we came from. A couple weeks ago, the VMware portion of our business was so successful that ultimately we've sold that to VMware, and they're going forward with our True Visibility Suite. And so it made sense for us as a company to relaunch as ObserveIQ, taking the core that we've been working on and kind of where we're headed and what we see needs to change in the space. So we're really excited to get started and launching with some new open source technologies right out of the gate.
Wow. Mike, I don't know how many times you've founded companies and launched and all of that, but as someone who's done them a bunch of times, I don't know if you realize how lucky you are in that, you in essence, VMware bought a legacy part of your business that was nevertheless a very viable business and everything. But, VMware has acquired that legacy business, which in turn, I assume, has given you guys a cash infusion to go pursue and an energy perfusion, right? To go pursue what you think of as the next frontier here. What the opportunity. If I had to do it all over again, this is where I would go now with it, kind of thing, and that's great. I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs don't get that opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, this is fortunate, despite the current pandemic. I think that's maybe not the best time, maybe not the time we would have chosen, but being in the tech space, it's still possible. And I think for us, the way we view this is, it's taking all the focus that we have and putting it on this one thing that we really believe in can have an impact. And sort of in the experience of being in the space for so long and having access to and an understanding of where those gaps are, and especially over the last couple of years, seeing how it's changing. I think everyone on the team is very excited to really push forward and focus on log management primarily. Yeah.
Excellent. I think there's no time like the present to start a company, Mike. I think, you don't start companies at the height of a cycle. You start them and you ride that cycle up. And so I think it's a great time to start a company. You mentioned open source and some of, open source projects associated here. Tell us about them.
Yeah, so we have a number of products that are part of the Blue Medora that we're carrying in through with ObserveIQ. But one of the new releases that came out the same day we launched is our new open source log agent. So, if you're familiar with log management and log monitoring, you always have to drop a application on every server so it can gather those logs, parse them, send them along. And most customers, they'll use Fluentd or Logstash, some of the traditional agents that are out there in the Elastic stack. What we've done, because we've been working with customers and sort of identified this as a challenge for them, is rebuild the log agent from the ground up. And it's a focus entirely on getting the highest performance out of this possible, but also keeping the configurability of those agents that customers are used to. So this has been a big challenge for folks for a number of years, and something that we've seen with customers. Some of the largest Fortune 500 customers that we have are trying to implement an open source log implementation, and the bottleneck has been the agent. And so we're really excited to release our agent that removes that bottleneck, allows some massive improvements in throughput, in speed and resource reduction. And you have to think, when you're a large company and you have thousands or tens of thousands of these deployed across systems, if you can drop the CPU and memory footprint by 90+%, that has real meaningful impact, right? And not only that, but also allows you to start to push even more data. When we're talking to some of these customers who, with the expansion of their log monitoring over the last few years, they're going to sending terabytes per day, so sending terabytes of data per hour. And the expectation is that all of that's available. Right? You need to be able to, for true observability, you need to be able to, at any given point, dig in and figure out what's going on and diagnose those issues.
Excellent stuff. You're right. There are open source log agents out there, but the open source market, I think more so than commercial, like COTS kind of market, lends itself where we're always looking for better ways to do things, right? We're always looking how to do them, and so we need. Not that we need, but if you have a better solution, if you have a better mousetrap, I think it's a lot easier to have the open source community, get excited and adopt that than it would be, trying to fight that war in the commercial software kind of space.
I think it's true. I think that, and a lot of it comes down to passion, right? When you're dealing with open source, you have these passionate communities of developers and DevOps folks, and they're. I think it's a good point that maybe you don't necessarily need as much, but I still think it's difficult to get someone to change without a pretty dramatic difference. And that's kind of what we've focused on from the beginning, is saying, look, an incremental improvement probably isn't enough to get folks to change or make it worth their while. So what we really need to do is an order of magnitude difference. And that's what we've done in terms of performance. And I think when folks start to see our capabilities in terms of building your own parsers, right? So you have an application and you want to manage and monitor those logs. Well, typically it requires a little bit of effort on your own part and the ability to parse them. And so making that as simple as possible is a big benefit and time saver for customers. And I think when it is open source, grassroots, those developers and DevOps folks, they really care about that, right? They want a tool that works really well and is easy to use and powerful and fast. And I think that's what we're delivering with this. And this is just the first step. I think I mentioned we're launching this on day one, but it's really what we're building our full log management platform on top of. So what we've done is taken this as the core. We're using a lot of open source components, but also bundling in our service, our existing SaaS service bindplane, which is a full agent management layer. So it allows you to automatically deploy, automatically update, configure a full fleet of these agents. So when we combine all those things together, it pulls together a log management stack that's really designed for enterprise organizations that are trying to manage their DevOps and IT ops logs.
Excellent. Good stuff. So, Mike, I mean, again, a bit of a different situation for a startup, because you have you have everything you've worked on for 8 or 9, not everything, because some of it VMware did buy, but from a people, it's more comfortable, and you've got resources there. Where do you see it going now? I mean, log management is a space where, look, there's a lot of ways to skin the cat, right? There's a lot of players out there. What's really kind of next gen, or you feel that you really have an opportunity to set yourselves apart?
So I think, a couple of the things that I mentioned are really what we're focusing on. When I think about the log space and where the gap is right now, I think that there is a strong presence in the, security side and SIM. And I think when large organizations, when large enterprises try to handle their DevOps and IT ops logs, that's when it struggles a little bit. I think that typically where they want to go is to, what most customers would use is the Elastic Stack, and parts of those work really well. Like we said, we're trying to solve the bottleneck in the log agent, but also layering on what those enterprise customers expect, right? So typically as a large organization, you expect more than just to be handed an agent, say, go configure it yourself. And so what we're providing is that layer on top that manages everything. So it comes with a full library of existing configurations. So you can imagine, because of our pedigree of building these integrations, hundreds of them, and having this library of integrations for applications and hardware and cloud and virtual layer, we can bundle all that day one. And that's kind of the advantage of not being a fully brand new organization, but having a lot of that technology already built. So when we release our log agent, it has this library full of plugins that if a customer is running a Cassandra database, well, we have something that supports that already. If they're trying to monitor cloud technologies, we have something for that as well. So that's kind of just in terms of the ability to manage that. But then I think another area that we've focused a lot on, and I think is a piece that sets us apart because of that, because you have control of your full fleet of agents, that changes what you're able to do in terms of turning on and dialing up and down the amount of data that you're sending. So if you think about this, right, most companies, you're just required to gather all the data, gather all the logs all the time. And it's a fire hose, right? That's just the expectation. And if you want to have that data available, you need to be sending it all the time. What we've done differently, and that's expensive, right? All that data, storing that data, sending that data, that costs a lot of money. And customers are constantly trying to figure out, how do we manage that? How do we balance it? Because you can manage your entire fleet remotely with ObserveIQ Cloud, you can turn on and off the logs that you need when you need them. So if you want to say, all right, we're just going to look for the critical errors, that's what we're going to send by default. But when we have an incident, now we need to turn it up and make sure that all that data is available. What we've done is unlock that use case for customers. So you can store, send a small percentage of the data that you would typically require and just turn it up when you need it. So we still allow customers, if there's something critical, sure, send all that data, and happy to store that for you. But if you need to, on the fly, turn things on and off, that's a capability that we have. Whereas in the past, it just wasn't realistic. You're going in, reconfiguring, restarting agents, and the whole thing just ultimately doesn't go fast enough. It's not real time.
No. And quite frankly, what you wind up as a result of not doing that, you get, just more data. And I think one of the problems that we have in the log management space is, there was a time where we wanted as much data as we can get, right? Good or bad. And then we said, we're a big data solution, right? We do log management in a big data world. And then, of course, someone had to analyze that data. And my God, what a job that was. And then we, even analyzing it, we need humans. And it's too much for humans to go through, so we got to automate it and use ML, AI. And now, of course, the new kind of buzzword is observability, right? We are, and it's in your name, right? ObserveIQ. And I think that's almost a tip of the hat to recognizing that, getting data for data's sake alone may not be the smartest thing in the world. It's about observing what's there that needs to be acted on, right? And yeah, we could store everything under the cloud or on the cloud or whatever you want to call it, but observability is a key piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah. I think, and that's being in the space for quite some time, you see that is, and you see folks, the pendulum swings back and forth, right? And now we're gathering everything. We need more. We need more, and then you realize, all right, well, that's not manageable. We need to start going back the other direction. And so sometimes it's hard to pinpoint exactly where you are on that's where you are, but certainly right now, there's just massive amounts of data, whether it's from a perspective of just too much data to really be able to even comprehend and understand what's going on. That's one challenge, right? It's expensive. That's another challenge. So I think that finding ways to help customers mitigate that and limit that, that's critical. And that's, been a big focus for us.
Very cool. Mike, we're about out of time, but you know what we didn't mention? We didn't tell people how to get more information. Is it still the Blue Medora website, or is it their new...
No, I should check out our new website, ObserveIQLabs.com. Or you can look at us on GitHub at ObserveIQ. See, come and download, try out the new agent.
Excellent, man. Glad to hear that. Mike Kelly, CTO, co-founder at ObserveIQ. Is it ObserveIQ Labs then? And I was wrong.
No,
or is it ObserveIQ?
ObserveIQ. We've got the labs right now, but that's the domain. Yeah.
I gotcha. Hey, thanks for joining us, Mike. Best of luck with this. We'll be following you and looking for success.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Good talking with you.
All right.
Hey, this is Alan Schimmel. We're on TechStrong TV, and we're going to be right back with our next guest.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
As I mentioned at the top of the hour, my friend Liz Zalman is a woman I'm proud to be friends with and know. She does a great job, leading the charge at Strong DM. But she's what I would call a very hands-on CEO. They're not, Strong DM's not a huge organization. So Liz has done, sales, customer support, and everything else in between, as a good CEO does in a startup. I've had the pleasure to do a series of 5 interviews with Liz and some of the Strong DM customers. Here's our interview with Mason McLeod of Software.com, pretty well-known company, and how they're using Strong DM to help enable rapid integration with assets, whether they be on the cloud, the edge, remote, what have you, and, part of your identity and access management. So here's Elizabeth Zalman and Mason McLeod. Elizabeth's with Strong DM, Mason's with Software.com.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another episode here of TechStrong TV. We've got our reoccurring guest friend, Elizabeth Zalman of Strong DM, joining us here. Hey Liz. Hi, and joining Liz and I is Mason McLeod of Software.com. Hey Mason, welcome to TechStrong.tv.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All righty. So Mason, you're the new kid on the block, and we're going to give you a chance to lead things off. I think a lot of our audience has certainly heard of Software.com if they're not really, really familiar with it. But for those who aren't, why don't we give them a little background?
Sure. I mean, high level, Software.com is a developer data platform. And our aim is to create and provide insights for productivity for individual developers as well as engineering teams. We do this by gathering telemetry data from inside of code editors and then layering on contextual data from other parts of the software development lifecycle, like how many hours you've been in meetings, What kind of music do you listen to while you code? Do you code during work hours, after work hours, at the office, remotely? And then really paint the full picture of where your time goes and how it's impacted by these external inputs. And that's what we provide back to developers as kind of the product there. So you can really see how your time is impacted and what you're doing throughout the day in order to improve.
Very cool. And then, Mason, we should tell people, or at least give them a little background. What's your role at Software.com?
Yeah, so I'm the CTO here at Software, just joined this year. And, it's an exciting time to join in. The product's been out for a while, and so there's a lot of proven track record, and it's just taking it to that next level, and I'm excited to be here.
Very cool. And, we do have Liz from Strong DM here, so the obvious question is, you guys are using Strong DM, I'm going to assume. Talk to us. Why? What's happening that Strong DM was a solution for you?
Yeah. I mean, the main thing, and this is actually the second time that I've signed up to use Strong DM. I used them before at my previous company I worked at, Fair. It's a fintech company. And the real premise is that, at Fair, it's in fintechs, we gather a lot of personal information. At software, it's a lot of information about your behaviors and all of that stuff. And it's just personal information. And I feel like in the role that I have of being CTO, I have a responsibility to protect that. And I really personally feel like it's a moral obligation to protect my users' data. And StrongDM helps me do that in a number of ways. And so it's been a rock steady foundation that I always build into the tech stack whenever I go and build something now. Excellent.
So, you open the box, we got to see what's packed inside. What are the number of ways why, you can't just leave us hanging there?
Sure. I'll enumerate. So for getting access to developers, and the classic way that you do it for databases, right, is you have credentials that you share amongst however many developers need access to that database, which means as soon as you rotate that password, if you do, then you've got to update everyone else. And now you've got copies of passwords everywhere on people's local machines. And not everyone stays at a company for their entire life. So whenever they leave, you must do something about that. Like, that credential is now out in the wild. And there's not very many good tools to manage that. So StrongDM really fills that gap really, really nicely, that use case. So we can issue credentials automatically for people as they come on. We use Gusto for HR stuff. So they've got an API. We can just, as soon as someone comes online, we can issue them credentials to data stores immediately. And then if they go offline, say they're a contractor, they're immediately revoked. And the perimeter of the security just gets really tight and really well controlled, which is such a relief for me. And then on the other side, securing access to servers via SSH. And we're also deploying a new Kubernetes cluster, controlling kubectl access, and having all of that be auditable. Because we also have some contractors working on our database, so we can see what commands are running, what queries are running, and be able to trace that all back. And being most of the time, we're not, of course, looking at the audit trails. It's really knowing that it's there. If something happens, we'll know exactly how to trace that back.
Love it. Very, very good stuff. And you know what? I applaud your personal, taking this, I want to call it fiduciary duty or responsibility for safeguarding people's really personal data, for taking it personally like that. No pun intended. And maybe if more people did, we'd be better off. Though, look, no one ever raises their hand and says, I want to be breached, right? And even sometimes doing everything you can, it's still not enough to prevent these things. But you could certainly take, precautions. You can make it harder by using tools like a Strong DM and so forth. So much. I had a friend of mine call me last week, old client of mine from my security days, who unfortunately, they got to pretty bad. They got into his Charles Schwab account. They got into his payroll account. They got into all of his emails, and he's in the merchant processing business. So there was merchant application. It was crazy. And, he was besides himself. On the other hand, he didn't use a password manager, typical kind of things you hear. So, it happens. Anyway, but it's interesting, that across verticals, right, from fintech to what you do now at software.com, though the mission may have changed in terms of the business, goal, the mission in terms of protecting data is still relatively the same. Liz, is Mason's experience, Mason's motivations typical, you think, for strong DM customers across the board?
I think our customers feel deeply that there is our customers feel deeply that there is a right way to do things. I think Mason, as an early customer of ours and at Fair, I think came in and from day one just had a very particular point of view on how things should be done. I think he was actually one of the first customers to even be deploying Kubernetes in a production environment. And so our buyer is the head of infrastructure or InfoSec or DevOps as a way that they want to do things that's always very forward thinking, and finding a way to do them in an automated fashion that sort of fits into these, infrastructure 101, the ABCs of how to set something up in a way that helps them scale is probably a core precept that they have. I mean, Mason, how big are you guys now at Software when you inherited the team?
When I inherited the team, there were 5 other engineers, and grown that up by about 50%. So it's still small and growing, but I think no matter the size, the problem is still the same. And for me, the solution's been the same too.
Yeah. So at Fair, I think you guys were maybe 100 people who were touching some form of infrastructure, and here Mason he started at 6. So yeah, like certainly it's like when you know that there's a good way to do something and a right way to do something, you start it right at the beginning. Because to do that when you're 1,000 people you can do it, but it's a 2-year process of rinse and repeat sort of work group by work group. You do it right from the start and you're off to the races.
Well, if we all had the luxury of starting in a greenfield, right, and starting it from the beginning, as what a wonderful world it would be, as they say. But unfortunately, we don't, right? There's a lot of muddy brownfields out there. Mason, let's talk a little bit, and Liz as well, let's talk a little bit about, so this whole COVID thing comes up now, right? We're all here. You guys are in your houses doing this interview. What if any, effect has that had on the business, and has strong DM helped, hindered, not been a factor in that?
Yeah, so actually software.com's fully remote from the very beginning. So internally, it hasn't made a big difference in how we work. I think it's an upgrade, like going to strong DM for access control is an upgrade no matter how you work. I think it's probably more important whenever you're remote. Unless, people have central VPNs and those sorts of things, but it's still like building that defensive wall in strength and in depth is still the right move there. And so internally, it hasn't affected us too much just because of the way the company is set up. For the business itself, though, it actually highlights a big advantage that we can provide as part of our products of being able to see productivity metrics between remote and in office, because people are going to have a big choice coming back in from COVID whenever this is resolved of how much office space do I need an office? And then how do they actually guide that discussion and that decision when you don't have data around it? And that's where we can really fill a gap there between knowing how people are working remotely and how they're working in the office. So you can have a real comparison.
Well, what a great use case that is. I'm sure that was one of the use cases they drew up when they were starting the company, right? If there's a worldwide pandemic and everyone's working from home, wouldn't it be great to know how well they're working from home?
Yeah, it's amazing the foresight we had.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not. But nevertheless, it'd be nice to have there. I wonder about that issue, a question myself, though. I mean, here, we're a small company. We're about 23, 25 people. And everyone's remote now, except for me and my video director. And, we have 3.5 years left on our lease. Actually, September will be 3 years. So 3 years left on the lease. So I'm stuck with, this for 3 years. But I don't see people running back. And if they do, they may just come in a day or two a week. And you know what? That's as the CEO here and founder, it's fine with me. We're working fine remotely. No one needs to necessarily be here to do their job. Though I do think there is some good you get from having people in the same office, whether it's the water cooler or hallway talk or what have you. But that is, that's the new normal. That's the new now, and I think we need to get used to that. Liz, again, in every situation there are winners and losers, but in this whole COVID thing has, not your fault, obviously, right? But it's given people a reason to say, geez, I need something like a strong DM, right? I want to spin up my remote force, or I want to. We need to secure it better, or what have you. What are you hearing from companies? Mason's a 2-time user already, but first-time people, what are they saying when they come by?
Yeah, Alan, I am the mastermind behind COVID. You just didn't know it.
Exactly. Dr. Evil. Okay, we got you.
No, yeah. Mason is certainly in a subset of company that enjoys being remote from the start and being able to build that way. We saw a doubling down of an existing customer base where even if they had remote or satellite teams, now everybody became distributed, but also new people reaching out because traditional companies, you can't rely on the corporate network as a perimeter anymore. It's dead. It's completely gone. And you had to switch on a dime. And what do you do? And I can't even imagine, by deploying strong, oftentimes you can just throw out the VPN. Many customers choose to do that. And I can't even imagine what these poor IT folks were dealing with in old companies who you just had to go into the office. There was no other way of working. All of a sudden getting all of these requests, I can't connect to the VPN or any sort of IP-based whitelisting. Oh my God, to get access to privileged systems, my heart goes out to them.
Yeah. No, you know what? We did an interview last week from an analyst based up in Canada who just put out a report about, how COVID caused a short-term increase in people buying, concentrator licenses and, more VPN capacity, but how long term that's probably, throwing good money after bad in terms of out the window. I mean, you got to re-architect is the bottom line there. But it's hard to do an engine transplant in the middle of the race, and so people get stuck, in those situations.
Well, as one of my investors is fond of saying, you got to build the Ferrari while you're driving it.
Yeah, and that's ain't it the truth? I hear you, Mason. What about you guys at Software.com? I mean, are you just ready for the new normal here, and you were remote anyway? And because there's a part of, look, we could function in this environment. That's fine, but are your customers functioning in this environment? Because ultimately, if they cease to function, no matter how high functioning you are, big deal.
Yeah, I mean, developers are our customer base, so we've got to make sure that is continuing to function. Yeah, we've actually taken surveys on this for our customer base, which is nearing about 100,000, and the majority actually said that they would want to do a bit in the office and a bit remote. So kind of a mixed use case there. And I think that fits really well to get the advantages of being able to control your own schedule and control where you are with the in-person, being able to whiteboard together, being able to really come together and think of new ideas. And I remember all the hours that I spent in the office at Fair with a tight group of people developing all the stuff that we did there. And there are definitely some advantages to just being able to randomly yell out to the person in the other room to go and fix something. So I think that it's going to be a mix of that. And you'll have some people that'll want to go full remote once they've had the taste of it. Like, I really enjoy it. Like I said, and you can tell by the bare room behind me, I'm moving this week, actually. And it's really interesting to start to feel the effects of being able to live anywhere and work the same job. Like, having it completely disconnected is a new feeling for me. And it's weird, but I like it. And so, I
think we're going to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think, look, I read an article, I forgot what percentage rents in San Francisco are down, right? I think we're going to see rents going down in a lot of the cities because people are realizing where they work from, physically is not necessarily tied anymore to where the company is based. Now, you still want to hire people with skills in places like New York and San Francisco or Austin or Boulder. They still have high concentrations of people with skills. So it pays to maybe put an office there. But, I've had this conversation with Sid Sibrandy, CEO founder at GetLab. They got like 1,200 people and 1,200 offices because they don't have an office. Everyone, including Sid, works from home. And his thing is, for newer companies, it just doesn't pay because, once you put an office down, you're saying, that's it. I'm confined to that talent pool. Where if you want to swim it, have choices in a wider talent pool, you're not big enough to open an office wherever you'll find talent. And so, a remote force is probably the way to go. I mean, good for Liz and the strong DM team, right? But I think that's part of where we might be headed.
Yeah, and I think if you limit yourself to one specific geographic region to hire from, you're limiting the upside of your entire company.
Yep.
And incurring cost along the way.
Absolutely.
I
think that's an outdated look.
Do it. Yeah, I think so.
I think that's where we're headed. Anyway, guys, we're about out of time. Mason, I told you the 20 minutes goes quick because usually Elizabeth talks so much, she takes over the whole conversation. No, she doesn't. We're just kidding. Yeah. But I'm going to give you each a chance to say something before we log out here. Mason, you're the new kid on the block, so why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, again, thank you for having me on. And it was a pleasure to talk about what we do at Software, where, again, it's a developer data platform designed to help developers individually to see where they're spending their time, look at productivity metrics, and improve, as well as helping manage the entire software development lifecycle from input all the way through output. And thanks to Liz for Strong DM and Strong DM for a great product that helps us secure our data. It's definitely a huge benefit that I put into every tech stack that I build now.
Very cool. Elizabeth, I'm giving you the last word.
I think Mason just summed it up for me, although I think my hair is better than his, so I'm going to retain that for me.
I think both your hair is better than mine. And we'll leave
I don't know how his
then.
looks so tight, dude. Who's cutting your hair?
I cut it. I learned I watched YouTube. I missed this part here, but I did.
Yeah, no, you know what? I think that's been a thing. I mean, yeah, it's easier for guys than it is for gals. I will say that.
I commend you, Mason, both on your haircut and your choice of infrastructure technology products.
Very cool. Guys, on that note, we're going to call it a wrap. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV, Elizabeth Zalman from Strong DM, Mason McLeod from Software.com. Thanks for being our guest. We'll be right back with our next interview. All right, we're going to go back to the TechStrong Con archives today, and we are going to replay Tiffany Jaka of Harness talking about your guide to continuous delivery. I think it was a great presentation at TechStrong Con, and this presentation, as well as the other 50 or so presentations from TechStrong Con, are all still available at TechStrongCon.com, as well as DigitalAnarchist.com, so you can catch them on there. So here now is Tiffany Jaka from Harness.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to TechStrong Con. I'm Tiffany Jaka, and today I'm going to talk about continuous delivery. This session is really exciting to me because at Harness, we get to help empower developers to move fast without breaking things. And so this session is your guide to continuous delivery. We're going to talk about all of the good things, the components of delivery, how to scale it out so that you can support your whole organization in a sustainable way and repeatable way, right? Because as we know, there's a lot of components that are involved in software delivery. You have sort of the development side of things where you have to ensure that you've planned for all of your code features, that you execute on them, that you're continuously integrating them with tests and a build process so that those things can reach a customer. And operations manages a lot of that work, right? They ensure that your applications are running perfectly in different environments so that you can operate on them and monitor sort of the monitor your applications so that you can ensure that you understand how they're performing in case there are any incidents. And really, this talk is about how to combine all of these components so that you can have this continuous loop, so that development and ops doesn't feel like a silo. It's in fact a continuous loop that feeds into each other so that all of your deployments and your delivery feeds into the next iteration of work that you do. And it can inform you to deliver better and also develop better. So that's what we're going to talk about. A little bit more about me. I'm an evangelist at Harness, and so I am really passionate about sharing content and learning from other people's experiences and really giving people the opportunity to also share that. It's really exciting to be able to see developers work on things that matter most to them. Some things that don't matter is reinventing the wheel for solutions that already exist. So things like spending hours or weeks on end on a project to build a continuous delivery platform when you probably signed up to deliver on features and make a difference. And so that's one of the things I'm really passionate about, is helping developers move fast and not break things. We should be spending our time on things that are going to differentiate ourselves and our business versus how to deliver or how to do menial things that can be automated. And so this is just to say that there are a couple of different ways to go about this. And so if you're asking, like, how do I not break things? How do I move faster? Then we can discuss some anti-patterns for that. Some things that kind of stop flow and stop us from moving faster include anti-patterns like deploying software manually. So going into your laptop or SSHing into a specific environment and deploying your application as a single user. That can stop us from having visibility into our delivery, and so things like that will slow us down. Another anti-pattern is long release cycles. So waiting until you're almost completely done with a product before even putting it in a production-like environment, because maybe you don't have the resources to do that. And some of the problems that come from doing that include an infrequent deployment frequency, which can definitely slow you down and from getting new features out to customers. It can also lead to higher change failure rates, where every time you make a change, it's most likely that you're going to have some type of failure. And that's because your releases are too big. There's too many features, there's too many changes, and you don't know sort of what's causing a specific problem. You don't know how to debug it because you haven't put it into any type of environment. And so these things can cause issues. Another anti-pattern is manual configuration or environment management. So if you're going into an application and manually configuring it after you've deployed it, if you're manually installing specific dependencies onto your machines, that can be really challenging as well, because then you don't have any visibility into, well, aside from the person who actually did that work, what exactly happened on that machine? Can we verify it? Can we repeat it? Can we do it across multiple machines? And so that's stopping you from scale as well. And so this is all to say that we do a lot of these things because there's so much to do with delivery. We're worried about specific things. Maybe we don't have the right tools, the right processes to enable not doing these things. These are just common anti-patterns that I've come across in different organizations. And so hopefully, if you have any of these kind of anti-patterns in your organization, you can target them and figure out, at least have a plan for remediating some of these things so that you can move faster. So this is a good place to start, kind of talking about what is the difference between continuous integration and continuous delivery. We talk a lot about CI/CD in DevOps methodologies because it introduces this idea that you can automate your software delivery process, right? And so things that people don't really realize is that there is a lot that goes into software delivery. There is a lot that goes into continuous delivery that we don't really think about aside from pipelines. And a lot of times you'll hear the term delivery pipelines, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that concept. But it's a way for people to get from point A to point B in an automated and repeatable way. And so it's really interesting that people will invest in that, but they don't necessarily think about all of these components that go into building a full continuous delivery loop, right? That DevOps lifecycle loop that will really help you at every iteration deliver more value and more meaning to a customer. And so let's just talk about continuous integration. It basically starts when a developer commits code to a source code management, like a repository. And that will typically trigger a workflow that produces an artifact, some type of packaged artifact that's ready to be deployed. And so if you're in a Kubernetes environment, that artifact is a container image, right? And we'll typically store it in some type of repository, like a Nexus repository, a Docker hub. Maybe you're using a public cloud vendor, so you'll have a storage solution like AWS S3, an S3 bucket. JFrog Artifactory is also another tool that people use to store artifacts. If you're using a specific flavor of Kubernetes, you may have another tool that integrates with that. But it's typically, for continuous integration, pretty straightforward. As long as you're maintaining your test suite, you can essentially use certain tools like Jenkins, Circle CI, and any continuous integration tool to launch a build and test process every time your developer commits code, or maybe you do a specific thing. You can set different triggers, but typically it's when a developer commits or a PR, a pull request is approved. You can trigger a build process that will launch your test suite and then upload your artifacts into an artifact repository. And so continuous integration is pretty solid, right? People understand what the goal is and what the problem is, and sort of, how do I take what the developer output and have some type of package. Continuous delivery is a lot less defined. It's harder to, there's a lot more that goes into it. And it's something that a lot of people don't really think about when they think about continuous delivery. I think a lot of people focus on, okay, we get this artifact into a certain environment, boom, we're done. But that doesn't really entail delivery. It also doesn't really entail continuous. And so I do want to talk about each of these specific components within continuous delivery. But here's like the overview of the talk. We're going to talk about what it means to provision environments, infrastructure into our different cloud stacks, or our on-prem data centers. What does that even mean? What does it mean to approve changes, attest our continuous delivery artifacts across different environments? What does it mean to have some type of strategy for releasing our artifacts into an environment if it's going to meet a customer, or if it's something that we're going to mimic in a live environment? What does it mean to verify our applications so that the next time we're working on we're planning a working session, what do we want to optimize? Do we understand what we want to optimize? What are sort of the outputs of a deployment that inform our delivery teams? Our delivery teams have to be cross-functional, as we know, because delivering like, it's not just one person who delivers value. It's a whole team of people across different functions and different responsibilities. And so, how do we share that responsibility across our teams, our team members? How do we also ensure that when we're doing deployments that we're able to figure out how they contribute to our success? How do they contribute to our compliance for specific industries? How do we manage security within pipelines? How do we manage incidents are also another thing. So all of these things belong within continuous delivery that sometimes get overlooked, especially as we slowly iterate into automating our software delivery processes. It is a journey. It's not to say that you can do all of these things in a click of an eye, right? It does take a lot of planning. It does take some foresight, some intuition, some strategy. So hopefully this talk can give you a lot of that information. So let's talk a little bit more about pipelines, because it is sort of, it tends to be the heart of a CI/CD process. And so a delivery pipeline takes you from point A to point B. And primarily, it's through different workflows that you specify, different steps that you specify. So if I wanted a full end-to-end CI/CD pipeline, then I would take my code commit and bring it down and bring my pipeline all the way down to deploying to production. And in there, I'll have different steps and different environments that I interact with, right? I'll have my test and build and package process for continuous integration, continuously integrating changes, my code changes into a package deployable artifact. And that artifact gets stored in a repository. And after I have that artifact, right, I should be able to choose, what environments I want to provision to, or what environments I want to deploy to. And so that means I have to provision different environments. That has to be configurable through code. I can deploy to the typical deployment pipeline will have you deploy into a non-production environment so that you can do user acceptance testing, different types of verification. Then, once you feel that artifact has the proper tests and verification, then you can promote that into a production environment. And once you promote it to a production environment, you can also verify that that application is running properly. And if it's not, then it's important to be able to roll back on that deployment, on that change specifically. And so that's sort of the typical deployment process. You kind of have this CI aspect to it. And then afterwards, you want to provision your environment, deploy it to a non-production environment, do some testing, promote it to production, verify it, and if it's not doing so well, roll back. And pipelines just give people a good idea about what the process is, right? It gives you the opportunity to say, well, this is how we do deployments to production. This is how we do continuous integration. It's a set standard that lets people repeatedly get from point A to point B. And that's really important in organizations because you do want standardization and consistency. And typically what you'll see people do is they'll build into their pipeline this confidence that their application and their artifact is working properly in their environments. And so you'll hear a lot about enterprise governance and pipeline governance, which gives you this this integration into your pipelines, the ability to attest all of your artifacts and build confidence that your artifacts are proper and that all of your changes are managed properly and compliant. So that's another term that people will talk about when they discuss pipelines and automation. So we talked a little bit about continuous delivery and sort of what it means and how it differentiates from continuous integration. We also talked about how it feeds into this DevOps mentality where we want to continuously deliver value at different iterations. And so why might you want to pursue like investing into your continuous delivery process? Well, there's a couple of different effects and benefits to it. And so it includes empowering your teams, empowering your developers, right? And this is primarily through giving people the opportunity to focus on other things aside from, late night deployments, things that are failing in production but people don't understand. And it also reduces errors because it gives you the opportunity to automate a lot of these things. And so it also reduces stress on teams because every deployment doesn't have to be this thing where they're manually configuring everything. You have to write a bunch of documentation after a deployment. You may still do that, but it's a lowered stress because you have this platform or you have the solution that tracks your deployments and your delivery. And really, it's this continuous value that I was talking about that helps you with your helps you absorb the most from your process. So let's just get into sort of what it takes to deliver, continuously deliver. We talked enough about continuous delivery. So here is each of the aspects that I'm going to cover. I think that you have to kind of approach each step with its own nuances and its own sort of subject matter expertise that it requires. In different books like the DevOps Handbook and Accelerate, you'll see that people talk about cross-functional delivery teams because there is so much to do with continuous delivery. And as a developer, you may not have visibility into all of the work that is required to do some things like infrastructure provisioning or release strategies or managing verification. But continuous delivery is sort of this platform that gives you visibility into all of these things so that it's not just one person in front of a dashboard or one person in front of their tool and it has like nothing to do with everybody else. It's this idea of sharing responsibility. And so I wanted to share sort of the concerns and the approaches that people use for each of these aspects as sort of a roadmap for you to be able to plan, well, I want to invest in continuous delivery. How do I do it? Or what is sort of the plan that I should have going into it? And so let's just get started on that. The first thing that I want to talk about is infrastructure provisioning. And infrastructure has to deal with any of the pieces that you encounter within a specific environment. So if I'm talking about Kubernetes, then I'm also talking about all the pieces of Kubernetes, the networking, the configuration, the APIs, how it runs, where it runs. And so when we talk about different environments like production environments, test environments, development environments, it actually includes a lot of different things, right? Sometimes it includes Kubernetes. So that means we have to have a plan for being able to install Kubernetes. And we need to have a plan for how we set up firewall, how we set up security, how we set up networking. And so the main goal when we're doing infrastructure provisioning is that you're not doing these things manually, right? You should not have any direct changes to any of the infrastructure that you're provisioning or working with. And so that's why we see the emergence of people using tools like automation configuration tools like Ansible, Puppet, Chef, and then even just infrastructure provisioning tools like Terraform, and CloudFormation, because really what we should be thinking about is, okay, how do we want to provision these items? How do we want to deploy and configure them? And once we've deployed and configured them, how do we want to manage them, right? How do we want to manage our upgrades? How do we want to manage needing to have a certain dependency or different service in our specific environments? And so I really think that people should have a plan for like these specific 3 things. And that's why I call them out on the slide. It'll help you kind of think about, well, how am I doing it traditionally? How am I doing it right now versus how I should be doing it? And that'll give you a lot of ideas. And really, it's no different from how you would plan a typical development workflow, right? There are requirements, there are plans, there's scheduled work, right? And each iteration that we do work in, we find out what worked for us, what didn't work for us, and we pivot around that, right? And so I really think that we should, different practices like infrastructure as code or push button infrastructure. These are things that have borrowed from traditional programming paradigms, and we should try to practice those things as well when we're working with infrastructure. And so being able to kind of understand and have a plan for these things will help you in the long run when maybe you want to provision multiple environments and you want to provision them on demand. And you also want it to be a part of your continuous delivery pipeline. How do we want to have the control of our infrastructure through pipelines? That's also possible. And so pipelines don't just apply to applications. It can also apply to our infrastructure and different processes. So that's the first point. Next, I also want to talk about change management. And this is mostly around process, right? How do we want to ensure that we're reducing our risks, right? How do we ensure that we have control and visibility into the changes that we're making? That's why change management sometimes gets, it gets its equivalence with this the phrasing like gating. It involves I have sign off and gates here and promotion because they kind of go hand in hand, right? When we have these kind of gates or barriers in our software delivery process, it gives us some time to verify and check with confidence that something is working and something is good. And so in a typical continuous delivery pipeline, you'll have different abilities. You'll have the ability to do what's called a promotion, and that's sort of when you take an artifact from a lower environment to a higher environment, and that's why we call it promotion, because you're promoting that artifact across your different environments, right? So if I wanted to do continuous delivery and I had an application, I'd want it to start in a development or a test environment before I have it promoted to a higher environment, like a production environment. And so change management is this idea of letting you do those releases at a press of a button. And it gives you information about your builds. It gives you information about your artifacts that have gone across that specific deployment pipeline. And so this is just another feature that continuous delivery pipelines should have. That's all I would really think of it as. If you're in a heavily regulated industry, this can be really important because maybe there's one or two people that have the authority to approve a sign-off process or a deployment, and that's fine. If your pipeline takes you from point A to point B all the way up until that gate, that's perfectly fine. That gives the person who's approving it the assurance that it's gone through all of those steps properly. And so, maybe your focus as like a delivery organization or a development organization is just working on those components of the pipeline and strengthening that process. There are different parts of it, and obviously you can build it down all the way down into an actual production deployment. But change management is about quality and signing off on a specific artifact or a specific instance within your delivery pipeline. And then also that kind of goes into like this quality talk this aspect of quality that we were talking about, right? How do we ensure that feedback is shared across all of our members, right? How do we verify that an application is running properly in our environments? And how do I ensure that that's shared with everybody? And so verification has also observability has gotten really popular within different organizations because people realize that they have to understand the complexity that is their applications. They have to understand the ecosystem of their systems, right? So, if an application fails at, if you have a microservices application or any type of services, if you have a request going through and it fails, where within that call chain did it fail? Being able to understand these things are really important. And, it's not just an operations responsibility to understand that. It's also a developer's responsibility to understand that. It's also a tool that developers can use to better understand their applications, understand the bottlenecks. And so the main question that comes when people think about observability and verification of their deployments is, what should they measure? What can they measure? And so there are a couple of different things that you want to think about when you're thinking about implementing a solution or a set of solutions. And that's around instrumentation. What do you need to instrument? What tools do you need to instrument into your environments so that you can get data, right? Is it my infrastructure? Do I want to have application-specific verification? If I do, then maybe I need specific instrumentation in my application. And so that's instrumentation. The second thing is understanding where you want to store the data and have it be visible so that you can do analysis on it, right? Oftentimes people will collect like way too many logs and they'll keep it forever, but they don't really use it. And so that's kind of a waste, right? So having a plan around how we want to store data, how long we want to store it for, how do we want to access it, how do we want to analyze it, are all important things to consider as well. And then third is around data aggregation. So one of the things to understand about metrics is that a lot of it is in a point of time, right? You maybe expose or take metrics on an application in a single point of time, but that's not really useful unless you can kind of map it and aggregate it over time. And so that's when you get dashboards and get more insights over what works and what doesn't work. And so being able to have a solution around how you want to aggregate data and how you want to display it is also another form of consideration. And then lastly is event notification. How do you want to be notified? How do you want to be alerted? Is another aspect to verification that sometimes people don't have or haven't really invested in, but should also consider as part of their verification process. So I have a couple more talks on observability and verification in particular. It's a really big topic, and really a lot of these components are, I mean, you could have a specific talk that goes into each one of these things. So I know that I'm skipping over a lot of important, like a lot of like the nuances and things that you should be thinking about, but I hope that this gives you a good idea and sort of a roadmap to say like, hey, if I want to succeed in continuous delivery, here are the specific points that I need to touch on, and maybe I'll refer to my team, my people, my experts to help me kind of fill in and flesh out sort of more of the implementation details so that I can execute on this. So with that, in terms of verification, that just assumes that you've already had the application deployed, but there's also this component of, how do I want to release and how do I want to back out of changes when they don't go well? And so I put release strategies and rollback together in this slide because the way that you release should be similar or the same as how you roll back that change. So really, rollback and release is about reducing the fear and risks of a deployment, right? I think a lot of times people will avoid doing continuous delivery, or even just, people will avoid having these systems or letting developers have access to their own deployments because there's a lot of risk involved in it, right? And if you haven't built out the processes to ensure that you're minimizing that risk or reducing that risk, then really you don't feel comfortable doing those like weekly releases or daily releases because you're not sure if I have something live in a production environment that I can roll back. And so that's why release strategies are really important. Different solutions have been emerging lately that we see, like with Istio, that lets us do kind of rolling deployments or A/B testing or network shifting, network traffic shifting, and it gives us the security that in case traffic is going to the wrong application or going to to an incorrect or faulty application, that we can just switch traffic over. And so continuous delivery also helps with that because once you build in this process of releasing, you can also build in a process for rolling back. And so there's two standard ways that people release and roll back, and it's really to, when you're doing a deployment, keep an old version of the application rolling or keep it up, so that if that new version of the application is not working, well, then you can just switch it over, right? So that's the typical one. That's the one that people are comfortable with, right? It's simpler because all you have to do is have two instances of your application running, and so people will trade off, their compute to do that, their compute resources to do that, because it does. That is sort of the trade-off, is that you have to have two applications running, two instances of your application running, and so that can sometimes be heavy. The second method is you'll have only one instance of your application running at a time. So you'll shut down the old one, or you'll shut down the old one, deploy, or you'll shift traffic over and then shut down the old one. However you want to do it. Essentially, it's whenever there's an issue, you have this new one that you have this new application and then this old application that was rolled down. Well, if there's an issue, roll back up that old, that stable version, that old version that you knew was working, and then shift traffic over. So there's two ways to do it. Those are the main ways. There are a couple different release strategies and things that can work for you. Different continuous delivery platforms will provide different the business functions to do those release strategies. Having a plan that works for you is really important. I think in many cases, people run into issues with their data storage, right? What happens if I deploy a new version of my database with changes, and how do I migrate that data? So being able to think about sort of all of your applications or all of the things that you're going to deploy and how you want to deploy them and roll back in case there are any issues is also really integral in the process, because this is sort of the most fear and anxiety inducing process within continuous delivery is the delivery itself. So lastly, I want to talk about pipeline management and sort of how we want to have it accessible to developers. So one of the things around pipeline management is that, you know, it is accessible to different people, and that you can control what is accessible to different people. So having a set of pipelines and solutions for different application teams is really useful when you're onboarding, and which sometimes can take a really long time if, you know, you're doing it in the traditional sense where you have to, you know, maybe create a new pipeline script, create a whole new process. I think having a couple of set templates and then working off of those templates in case there are any weird use cases or flows that you have to work through is kind of the way to go, right? You want to have this foundation. And so pipeline management is about having idempotent pipelines. So idempotent means that it's essentially that if you go through a certain state with if you go through a certain part of your pipeline, if it fails at any point, then if you run it again, it doesn't affect that next deployment. So idempotency is really important. It's a concept that people will talk about in infrastructure provisioning or configuration management. Also, another part is around push button abilities. So being able to just hit deploy and understand that you know, kind of get back information about your deployment is really important. And so how we think about how we access control and pipelines is sort of another aspect of continuous delivery that I think a lot of people should invest in. You know, what should developers have access to? What should they not have access to is also really important. So, you know, if you liken pipeline management to that makes that, you know, then you can understand it a little bit more. Also, audit and compliance is a big thing, right? And especially in different specific industries like healthcare or finance. Auditing, it kind of answers the question of who, what, who, when, you know, where, and why. So being able to get sort of an audit log on who did a deployment, when did they do that deployment, where did it go, you know, what was the artifact that was deployed is really important. And so continuous delivery also helps you with that. And it's something that you should consider if you're having any issues with, you know, audit trails or compliance, regulatory compliance mandates. So these are the components for how to achieve continuous delivery. You know, but how do we do it at an enterprise scale? I want to talk about, this is the last section of this talk, and I want to talk about sort of how do you want to achieve that. So we talked a little bit about the components, right? And how pipelines you can build a lot of those components into your pipelines, right? So that you are releasing repeatably and reliably. There's also this component of automation where you're automating a lot of your tasks, the daily things that you would otherwise have to do manually or you would not be able to have visibility into. Automation and pipelines kind of helps you with that. And then there's this idea of self-service, right? Being able to control or have some type of control into your delivery process empowers people to be responsible for the delivery of an application. You know, it's not like we're throwing things on the wall or over the wall. It's not that we're, you know, just kind of blindly taking in requirements. Or we're not thinking about, you know, how to maintain code bases, how to, you know, how to really achieve application development at scale, right? And self-service ensures that everybody has a sense of responsibility and understanding about what goes into delivery. continuous delivery also means continuous improvement, that we're building quality into each deployment. And each deployment is helping us build quality into our next deployment. It's really this cycle that encourages improvement and gives people the tools to understand where they can improve next. So that's sort of the heart of this talk, right? How do we enable continuous? Continuous integration and continuous delivery, so that we have this DevOps loop that feeds into our life cycle of an application. And so it's all of these pieces that, that says what operation does feeds into what development does, and what development does feeds into what operations does. And it bleeds in to create this process that harmonizes across different teams and an organization. And so that's why I want to talk about continuous delivery as a service, which is Harness's product, and helps you do a lot of these things. So we have something called continuous verification, which ensures that our release strategies can be verified, and our releases can be verified. And if they're not verified, you can automatically roll back. I think a lot of things that are emerging right now is around ML ops and AI ops, which is this idea that we can use AI and ML methodologies to improve our operations tasks, right? So, how do we use our existing tool sets, our existing maybe monitoring tools, our APM solutions to inform how we do our deployments, how do we verify our deployments, right? And so continuous verification is being able to set those specific rules, and then letting your machine learning algorithms or any type of logic dictate whether we pass, whether we're verified or not. Then we also have smart automation, which includes integrations that allow you to use your existing tool chains or your existing environments to really automate this process of environments. So there's that, and then there's continuous security and continuous insights, which gives you like what we were saying with dashboards and being able to control secrets management and audits, and basically ensuring that it's not just dev and ops, but it's also security, DevSecOps. So those are some components that Harness offers. If you'd like to know more, definitely reach out to us. We'll be at the booth. More than happy to answer any questions or even schedule a demo. But yeah, that's some more about continuous delivery. So glad that you guys could join this session talking about sort of what it takes to achieve continuous delivery. But yeah, thank you everybody for attending.
That was a great presentation on continuous delivery from our friends at Harness at TechStrong Con. It was a great, it was a great, it's actually a great virtual event with so much great content. We are planning several other virtual events that I want to make you aware of. First of all, we are co-producing the DevOps India Summit, which was originally an in-person event in India the last couple of years, the largest DevOps event in India. Of course, this year with everything, it's virtual. The good news is you don't have to be in Bangalore to attend anymore. You can be anywhere. And it's a great lineup of speakers, including yours truly. And DevSecOps is a big theme at this year's DevOps India Summit. I think there's a couple of thousand people registered already, so it promises to be a great one. Please check that out. DevOps India Summit, and I think they're looking for sponsors as well still, so if you want to reach a great audience and it's not just an Indian audience, you should go to DevOps India Summit, checking that out. I did mention earlier in the show we are helping with the GetLab Commit virtual event, which promises to be probably one of the biggest virtual events so far this season. Amazing lineup of speakers, but it's more than speakers. There's a ton of interactivity, a ton of kind of events swirling around it and activities. So do check that out. GitLab commit. And then in October, we will be bringing back our third annual DevOps experience. We are just finalizing some of the major headliners who will talk there. And also in October, we will have our virtual Kubernetes, second annual virtual Kubernetes summit. Also promises to be great, and we will have more information on that in the coming month. So, lots going on there. But now let's talk about what else is going on around the media ops neighborhood. As usual, I'm going to give you a couple of headlines from the different sites that we have, and they're not meant to be exhaustive or all-encompassing. You really got to go to the sites and check them out. But let me tell you, on Security Boulevard today, we have the results of a survey of what's the top security stressor, lack of support. I wouldn't have guessed that, but it's a good survey. Go check that out. Sunrise Security adds governance engine to tool based on Graph. Graph is a really popular open source project, and go check that one out. And then all you need to know about HIPAA requirements, I bet. But anyway, those are some of the hot ones up on the boulevard. Over on Container Journal, we have Pan digs deep into Kubernetes security flaw. This is the way things get better. These flaws are found, exposed, they're patched and fixed, and we move on. Also, a new report from Forrester highlights rising container security issues. Okay, I see a theme building here. But the good news is there's a lot of container security companies that are addressing them. And I often wonder when you look at, the folks at Forrester are good people, as are Gartner and the rest of them. But when you start seeing reports like that, and then you start seeing the flood of new container security companies, how closely related are they? I wish we had more transparency in our analyst reporting and so forth. And that's frankly one of the reasons I helped found Accelerated Strategies Group. I think we need more transparency in our analysts. Over on DevOps.com, performance issues, looking beyond the infrastructure. Good article there for my DevOps and SRE folks. A developer's guide to CCPA GDPR compliance. I know no one wants to sit here and be a compliance expert, but it's a fact of our lives right now. So good article if you need a little information there, a little help. And then the results of a new survey, DevOps have benefited over how DevOps companies, DevOps haves, you want to call them high-performing IT teams, whatever. Companies that are doing DevOps have benefited over those who aren't. And that's the bottom line there. So good article on DevOps.com. All good articles around all three sites. Do check them out. But for now, we're going to head over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor, who has a great interview and a preview of our upcoming webinars here on Media Ops.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, managing editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with John Torr, who is the CMO at Cloudian. John, thanks so much for taking a couple minutes and talking with me today. So excited to have you here.
Great to be here, Charlene. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I know you guys are big in the cloud space, obviously, but cloud security and ransomware is something that I'm sure has been on your minds for a while. So, I know that you guys also have been talking with a lot of companies about ways that they can protect themselves against ransomware. Hoping that we can talk about that a little bit, but I wonder if you can start by just kind of paint me a picture, if you will, of what's happening in the ransomware space today.
Yeah, it's phenomenal, Charlie. I mean, the increase in ransomware attacks over the past year has just been phenomenal. The World Economic Forum reported that the attack rate is doubling year over year. And we've seen some really recent examples of this, such as the Garmin attack that shut down their operations for 4 days. We don't know how much it cost them. The ransom demand was apparently $10 million. Wow. Another one was UCSF, $1 million attack that impacted their research data. And then the travel firm, exchange firm, TravelX, shut down for days in a $2 million attack. So, yeah, it's been increasing at a tremendous rate.
Yeah, it seems to be, at least over the last, 8 to 12 months or so, we're hearing so much more about ransomware, and it's to the point where pretty much everybody knows what ransomware is these days.
Right.
It's kind of jumped the shark when everybody knows what it is.
Right.
So what can be attributed to this rise in ransomware? I mean, what are some of the factors that are out there right now?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think first and foremost, it works, right? It's a proven business model, and once people find out there's a business model that can be repeated, other people are going to try it as well. So I think that's one thing that attacks are getting a lot of publicity for negative consequences there. Mm-hmm. Another thing is, a lot of these sources are coming out of countries that are economically depressed. Like North Korea is suspected of being behind a lot of them. Of course, with the increased sanctions on North Korea, they're in real trouble. And then also, the environment. We've got a lot more people working from home now, and some people are thinking that is putting more workers at risk for attacks that can go through their computers, or phishing attacks where they can be compromising their information by just having less control. They're outside of the firewall. People are more exposed.
So do you think that because of this new work from home environment brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the fact that there are maybe less security in home environments, that is kind of setting up corporations to be like the perfect victims for ransomware these days?
That certainly is a suspicion. Is that that is providing another vector, or an easier vector that perhaps wasn't accessible before. But frankly, I think the bigger thing is just that it's an attack model that works, and people are figuring out how to make it work, and they're being very devious about it. I mean, the idea is obviously you're encrypting the company's data where it is most vulnerable, and that's on the servers, which are in the data center, and they can be in the cloud as well. And another part of this is not only they encrypting the data on the servers, but the very first thing they go and encrypt is the backup copy of the data. So, with the traditional defense mechanism, I've got a backup copy, that actually is no longer a real defense, because you've got to have everything protected, including those backup copies. So I think people are getting more clever about how they go about this, and that makes it more effective.
So are there particular markets or industries or verticals that you're seeing, your organization is seeing an increase in ransomware?
It really seems to be targeting government, government, education, institutions, which typically would have, less modern security defenses. But even having said that, the most recent major attack was Garmin, and you'd think that a company like Garmin would probably have among the most sophisticated defenses possible. So I guess the bottom line is we're seeing more of it in the government side, private and public sector, but no one is immune.
What I find really interesting about it is just the evolution, if you will, of ransomware. From these kind of attacks where the hackers get in and they hold the data for hostage, but they look for the ransom to be paid. But now I'm hearing about attacks that not only do that and demand a ransom be paid, but if the ransom is not paid, they'll actually release the data and thereby causing a data breach, and which puts the company out of compliance with GDPR, CCPA, any of those compliance regulations that exist now. So, what can organizations do to protect themselves? I mean, it just seems like there's a no-win situation here, especially if the advice always seems to be, don't pay the ransom.
Well, certainly. I mean, we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? Because,
right.
Right. But you got to have a multi-prong approach to how you go about this, and the beauty is, Cloudian is in the enterprise storage space. We provide on-prem storage systems to enterprises and public sector organizations, and today with storage technology, you actually have a way of protecting against both of those scenarios you just mentioned. One, you can protect yourself from having to pay the ransom to begin with. And two, you have a way to protect yourself from that data being released. So starting with that second one, data being released, most modern storage devices, including ours, have the ability to encrypt data. So data at rest is protected from being compromised by virtue of the data itself is encrypted. So if someone were to be able to download those files without having the decryption key, it would be useless, right? There's nothing to release because the data is protected. The second thing is, and this is probably the most critical part, is protecting yourself from the attack to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And reality is that encrypting your backup data yourself doesn't do you any good in that one, because even if your data is encrypted so they can't release it, they can still re-encrypt it and keep you from being able to access it. So what we do is we provide a mechanism where that data cannot be altered. Once that backup data, you can't come in and change it or delete it for a certain period of time. It's like a time lock on a vault, right? The reason they put time locks on a vault is even if you drag the manager down to the bank in the middle of the night, you still can't get in. So there's no point in doing that. But we do the same thing with your data. We put your data in a room where it is protected from being changed or deleted for whatever period of time you. So if ransomware comes in and tries to change that data, encrypting it, you now have a way of protecting it from that encryption and therefore protecting yourself from ransomware.
Okay. Interesting. Are there other things that organizations can do, just kind of best practices that that might actually protect them a little bit better from ransomware?
Yeah. So I mean, in general, obviously, it's the standard techniques of perimeter defenses, right? You want to make sure that you've got firewalls in place, that you've got your people trained, that you've got all your systems locked down, and frankly, the data center itself can also be a point of exposure. So it goes all the way from the outer perimeter to the inner perimeter. Making sure that your personnel in your data center are properly vetted. That the people working in your facility are, properly trained to prevent against phishing attacks, and that you've got the perimeter defenses in place. Those three layers can all provide you with a level of protection and security. Reality is, though, that every one of those is vulnerable because every one of them has a common element. They've all got people involved. Everything can be ultimately penetrated. So if you really want to have that ultimate level of protection, you need to have the data itself protected at the device level. And when I say at the device level, I mean actually protected to the point where even if someone has physical access to the box, your data is still protected. That's what we have to prove. We went through the certifications with SEC and at FIPS and common criteria, and we had to prove that even if someone has physical access to the box, that you would not be able to alter that or delete that data. That's what we had to go through to get those certifications, and that's what that's what enterprises should be looking for in a repository to protect that information themselves.
All right, great. Well, I have a feeling we're going to be hearing a lot more about ransomware before somebody comes up with a really good solution for it. So, but right now, I'm not seeing that anytime soon. So we'll just have to see what the market plays out. But John, thanks so much for your time today. Really do appreciate it. As I said before, ransomware is definitely a topic we're going to be talking about again. So hopefully we'll see you on a future TechStrong TV broadcast.
Great, Charlene. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with your Thursday edition of the webinar preview. So the first webinar that I want to talk to you guys about today is happening Thursday, which is today at 1 p.m. Eastern. This is happening on DevOps.com. The name of the webinar is Running a Cost-Effective DynamoDB Compatible Database on Managed Kubernetes Services. That is definitely a mouthful, but this webinar actually talks about the Scylla technology, which is actually Scylla DB is the sponsor of the webinar. So during the webinar, as I said, they're going to be talking about their own technology, which is an open source drop-in NoSQL replacement for Amazon DynamoDB. And also Apache Cassandra. So the webinar is going to talk about how the technology was created, some of the cost and performance advantages that it offers over DynamoDB, and lots of other stuff. So if you are looking for an alternative to DynamoDB, you want to learn more information, definitely this is the webinar for you. The next webinar that I want to let you guys know about is happening Friday, July 31st at 11 a.m. on Security Boulevard, 11 a.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. This one is sponsored by Palo Alto Networks, and it is called the Ever-Evolving Trend Lines in Cloud Native Security 2020. And this is the result of a survey that Palo Alto Networks conducted earlier this year with about 3,000 IT security and I guess cloud professionals, just kind of looking to take the pulse of the market, see what's happening out there. So they're going to talk about what they learned regarding the state of cloud native adoption, the state of cloud native security, the preparedness of organizations in their security posture overall, and some other really interesting findings. So definitely one well worth your time on Friday if you're able to join us for that. Again, that one is happening at 11 a.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. Our final webinar today I want to let you guys know about is happening next Tuesday, August 5th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is sponsored by Red Hat, and it is called Why DevSecOps is Critical for Containers and Kubernetes. So it's one of those explanatory titles. They're talking about looking at the importance of security in and its integration into DevOps, especially for organizations looking to achieve speed of deployment and automation that cloud native technologies such as containers and Kubernetes can provide. So if you are in the market or using container technology, maybe having some issues with your speed of deployment, maybe it's not working as well for you, definitely give this webinar a look. I think you might learn a thing or two for this from this webinar, what it actually has to say. So folks at Red Hat are sponsoring this webinar, as I said, and it's happening next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. All right, that's it for the webinar preview, Thursday edition. Tune in on Monday when I'll have more webinars coming your way. But until then, please stay safe.
Thanks, Charlene. Great interview with John Tor as well as preview on our webinars. I appreciate it. So, you know, after Charlene finishes, we usually head right on over to the Analyst Corner, where I'm happy to have my friend Mitch Ashley, CEO, founder of Accelerated Strategies Group, and Mitch has a great Analyst Corner for us today. Hey, Mitchell, take it away.
Hey, 'Cause 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 ' Hi, thanks for joining me on Analyst Corner. Mitch Ashley, CEO with Accelerated Strategies Group. Today, I give you a heads up. We're going to replay a video that aired not too long ago, but it's a panel led by Evelyn Orlick, who's, I talked about Evelyn before, fantastic person. I enjoy working with her, and wealth of knowledge and experience in the analyst business. Knows a lot of great people too. So she brought together, I'll call it a distinguished panel. Now I'm on it too, so that was a little bit of a self-serving comment, but I'm really speaking of the other people that she brought together on this panel to talk about kind of people and adoption of DevOps. And this is going to take it in an organizational perspective. There's the great things that happen with the DevOps Institute, with the humans of DevOps. And Evelyn's been involved in that, did a research study for Jane Grohl over at the DevOps Institute. So be sure and check that out. That's a great resource. But this panel takes sort of a leadership view, kind of lens on the topic of that organizational dynamic and the adoption of DevOps. Now, on this panel, there's some great people. First of all is Mark Settle. And Mark is I believe, a 7-time Valley CEO. I'm sorry, CIO. There we go, say it correctly. So he's been with some, pretty well-known companies. BMC is one of them, and HP, and a number of different roles that he's had. He's got a lot of experience, so he can speak to organizational dynamics and transition and IT and what that involves. And so kind of like myself, but on a larger scale. He's worked with much larger companies than I tend to. But you kind of get that perspective after having done it multiple times. And then joining us also is Tom Goguin, who is with Micro Focus, and he leads a product development organization, and he's in the thick of it, really talking about the metrics and how you manage things and what's real and what's not, and kind of brings a hugely important perspective. What's very cool about this panel is Evelyn is leading it. I'm just a participant on it. And I kind of have to, I actually read a little segment on LinkedIn where I talked about that leaders lose perspective about what the experience of being a follower is, because we tend to be in leadership roles over and over again. And after a while, you kind of drink your own Kool-Aid, maybe get some ego that's a little beyond what it should be, maybe far in some cases. But if you're not a leader, if you're not a follower in any part of your life, that's experience that you don't have, and things are changing. What it's like being a follower is changing. So it's a great perspective also that Tom brings from this standpoint, because he's really in that adoption and how you make DevOps work on a day-to-day basis. I didn't mention also that Mark is a 2-time book author. He just sent me his books. I've not read them yet, but I definitely would encourage checking those out. So he's got some great books there. A little too close to the camera, but Truth from the Trenches and Truth from the Valley. So certainly a thought leader as well as a leader. So I'm replaying this panel again because I'd like more people to have an opportunity to see it. You can always go to Digital Anarchist, and all of our videos are hosted there at digitalanarchist.com. And the dynamic, the discussion, kind of the viewpoints, I think are super helpful. So thank you for joining us for that. Now, one other comment I want to make about sort of people. We talk about people, process, and tools. Well, it should be people, process, tools, and people, because it starts and ends with people. That's my opinion. The others are kind of support in support of people, because we don't do work without people, whether it's automated or not. Somebody automated, right? And if somebody needs to update it and change it. And I happened to get a inquiry about a report from an ERP company I'm not going to mention because it isn't really a comment about them, but the report that was done for them talks about managing human capital. Honestly, I'm actually offended by that term. You choose to be offended by what you're going to be offended by, and it's not like it's deeply, hurts to the bottom of my soul kind of offended, but it's one of those really, do we really want to label our people as capital? What's next? Are they human widgets? It just seems like a crass term, callous, dehumanizing term. And I understand HR is in lots of things and lots of parts of the business, but fundamentally they're doing hiring, firing, onboarding, offboarding, payroll, benefits. There's a huge amount of administration that they do, and some HR organizations go beyond that, and training and things like that. But there's some operate a little bit more strategically, I would say. But it's really, do we need to refer to people that way? So I just kind of objected to that, and maybe in this climate of today of being a little more sensitive about what we're calling people and how they might take that, I would never refer to my employees, staff, contractors, whoever it is, as capital, because I don't move them between accounts, and I don't track them as an account balance, and I don't count how much interest they grow. I count their own personal growth and development and what they can do in their career, not just at the job they're on today, which maybe they're working with me today. Maybe I'm working for them tomorrow. That's happened in my career, where I've worked for people that I've previously managed, which is an awesome experience. Something I definitely recommend you do. If you've developed your folks to the point where they can lead you next time, or you can help them by joining their team, all the better. So that's an aside, and I'm going to comment on it on LinkedIn. I did a little bit on that report already, but that's one of those I just kind of let's move on. And I know we're kind of searching for terms of what to call HR, which is a whole nother topic, but I don't think human capital resource management is the right term. Certainly I wouldn't go there. So park that aside as a commentary, my feelings about the topic. Let's join Evelyn, who's going to lead this panel, does an excellent job, and getting some great information out of their participants, creating some good dialogue. Thanks for joining me today.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hello, everybody. My name is Evelyn Ehrlich. I'm a research director doing research since many years around the topic of DevOps, digital transformation, and many 3 or 4 letter acronyms, I have to say. And I have to tell you, I'm with a fantastic gang of 4, I call them. Gentlemen I have known and met throughout my career, and I'm absolutely excited to have them here. They'll introduce themselves. Let me quickly set the stage for our conversation we're going to have for the next about 40 minutes or so. Everybody really, at this point in time, has heard of digital transformation. I don't think I need to explain that. The digital journey is has quite been accelerated, particularly due to the pandemic. There are many digital services which have showed up without us really wanting to have them done, but they needed to be done, and that's actually great news. Now with that, DevOps and the DevOps professional, the DevOps role, the DevOps movement, or the DevOps journey is one which plays a pretty significant role in that. And so what we wanted to do for the next 40 minutes is talk about the topic around what are some of the challenges on the skills relative to developing this DevOps team, the DevOps individual, the DevOps group, because we know there's a lot of challenges. I do know from research I've conducted that there are significant challenges relative to upskilling. We do know that about 48% from a survey we just recently did, 48% say they have no chance to find a skilled DevOps individual. And then 38% say once they found one, it's really hard to retain them. So that's kind of giving us the broad framework for our conversation. Gentlemen, I think might make sense to just introduce yourself. What do you do? Who are you? And then I'd love for you to share with us and with our audience what keeps you motivated in this time of our pandemic worldwide. What keeps you going? Because it is a challenge for all of us. So, Mitch, you're on the top left of my screen. Why don't you start?
Great. How about I'll start and then I'll hand it off, pick somebody next.
That's great.
Okay, great. Mitch Ashley, CEO with Accelerated Strategies Group. And we focus on the areas that you're talking about: digital transformation, DevOps, cloud native, cybersecurity, those areas. My background is I'm a repeat entrepreneur. I've also worked in large enterprise, started in IT as a developer, kind of moved up through the ranks. But I've been in IT as a CIO and head of IT organizations. I've also been a CTO of product organizations for SaaS online services, for security products. So I kind of worn both hats and been on both sides, which is what makes being in the analyst business a little bit more fascinating. In terms of keeping me up at night, I'm fascinated by not just change, but what is the change going to look like? And it's change means we're creating the future. And so I'm always constantly trying to figure out, well, what does this mean? Where is that going? What are other people seeing, learning, and doing? And how can I help other people in that process and get to whatever that new future looks like? So that's jazzing to me. So thank you. How about Tom? You want to go next?
Oh, sure. So Tom Gogan, I'm the Chief Product Officer and head up the IT Ops Management Products Group at Micro Focus. Background, I've been with Micro Focus, previously HPE, for 4.5, 5 years now. Prior to that, I've done a succession of roles at places like Sun Microsystems, Apple, BlackBerry, over the course of my career. So covered off on a lot of mostly building enterprise software products, delivering those to market. Yeah, what keeps me up at night, or what's the challenge? I always answer those questions. You know, the most important thing for me is taking care of my family, especially at a time like this. You know, keeping things going, and the thing that keeps me up at night is, when are my teenage boys going back to school? So looking forward to that time.
Great. How about Mark? You want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Mark Settle. I am a 7-time CIO, and I'm currently serving as an advisor to a variety of startup companies. I'm based here in the Bay Area, and what's really actually pretty exciting about the current environment is, you know, many of these companies are doing extremely well. It's kind of counterintuitive, but many of the startups would tell you that they are more productive in the current environment than they were, you know, pre-COVID. The commuting obligations that people had in the past have gone away for the time being, and simple metrics like the amount of code that's being generated and, you know, put into GitHub, and if you look at the efficiency of the funnel that's used to generate sales prospects and convert them into actually new customers, those that maybe some companies failed completely. I mean, let's face it, some are not with us anymore. Some others maybe stumbled momentarily, but others, you know, have really come back. I had a funny story. I was talking to somebody who, an IT leader that was meeting with their facilities manager, and they were trying to put together here. And so I think, you know, a lot of firms here are pushing that off to sometime after the first of the year, and there's no definite plan for a lot of companies today.
That's interesting. Great. Jeff.
Hi, Jeff Weber. I'm the executive director with Robert Half Technology. We help organizations around the world find resources they need for their technology projects and operations, kind of all skill levels, but a lot of software development and technology operations and support. But I have about more than 35 years of experience. Started as a developer in the 80s, and, you know, wrote code and did projects, database design, et cetera, back in that era. And then always thought I was going to become a CIO like my colleagues here, but never quite made it. I got the consulting bug and spent 20 years in consulting, doing everything from security to strategy and governance and operations. Through that process, I got connected with Gene Kim doing some research on IT best practices and what made a good, what was the impact of good IT management, which eventually evolved into the DevOps. So I've been connected to DevOps as an operational model here for the last 10 years. So in my role with Robert Half, I help our teams figure out how to connect the right people to the right jobs. And, most of right now in COVID, the point of personal things, those kind of things, in my mind, I ebb and flow from, being this is perfectly great working at home to I can't believe I'm in the same chair and the same desk for now 123 days. And I don't know that I'll ever leave. But, it's that idea of we're talking a lot with our clients about when do they come back to work and how, right? It's easy for our technology people to be remote and do this work, even maybe more remote than ever, right? Can you fill a need with a resource in Florida for a project in Seattle? That would rarely have been done just 120 days ago, but it's happening more and more. So that idea of not only how to do the work, but then what type of work really matters, right? Are we really doing more DevOps, and what does it mean to people? And this whole concept of upskilling and training and resource modeling is something that I think what Mitch said is this idea of anticipating and the change. It's an exciting time when you get past the problems of today, right? There's a lot of really cool stuff that I think we'll end up talking about here this morning in relation to that. So looking forward to the discussion.
Great, very fantastic backgrounds. Thank you, gentlemen. So 42% of organizations are actually adopting DevOps at the project level. So that is one or many projects, right? And again, these are global enterprises. And then about 24% are adopting it at the enterprise level. That means at end-to-end, which is, wow, I have to say that's fantastic. And then 22% are planning, and then this is 2020 numbers. So all of these almost adds to 100%. There's a few who say, we tried it, it failed. Or some said that they're never going to do it for whatever reason. They might have the reasons because it might not be for them. So posing a question, why is it so hard to find these DevOps people? What do you guys think? What do you hear? What are some of the comments you have heard in your travels, in your virtual meetings, in your conversations? Mark, do you want to, 7-time CIO, I'm sure you have lots of exposure to many of your kinds. Share what you have heard.
So there are many flavors of DevOps. In IT, we love to have acronyms that don't really mean anything that can be used broadly to describe lots of different situations. And so there would be groups probably even that would claim that they're proficient in DevOps that other groups would look at and say, well, that's not even, that's not really even DevOps at all. In fact, I think sometimes to the uninitiated, the terms Agile and DevOps are used interchangeably. So if you're using Agile, then you say, well, we're a DevOps team. And so these things come in many different flavors. So you have to be kind of suspicious, especially when people start responding to surveys, what they think they're doing. This isn't like a certification that you get that says this group is definitely a class 1 DevOps team. But having said that, to kind of cut to the core of why this is so difficult, the terminology that I get exposed to, I don't know if I've ever seen a role, job position that would be online like a DevOps engineer necessarily. I think it'd be more generic, like a software engineer of some type or a principal software engineer, et cetera. Although I'd be interested if other members of the panel have seen that kind of nomenclature used in terms of position descriptions. But the more generic term that I've seen used, and I use all the time, is that of a full stack developer. And a full stack developer, the definition of that has really evolved over time. And one of the core DevOps principles is that the team members and the team is about as self-sufficient as it possibly could be. And with the tools that we have today, individuals can set up their own infrastructure, they can write their own code, they can debug their own code, they can release their own code, and the real purist would say that's sort of the end state that we all want to get to. Well, the problem is the number of tools that are out there have proliferated, incredibly. And so to be able to master those tools, and be adroit at, using them in the proper way and not bumping into other developers, et cetera, is a pretty sophisticated art form. And you don't see a lot of people that, fully embrace or are able to do that whole thing. In fact, I think it's kind of ironic that a lot of DevOps teams have actually gone back to some degree of role specialization. So instead of everybody doing QA on the team, there'll be a couple people, they may code, but they really spend most of their time on the QA side. And then maybe another team member that's sort of the infrastructure person that makes sure that, if they're spinning up or opening up environments, that those are getting turned off and, costs are being managed appropriately, et cetera. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I really think the kind of skill set that you look for is this full stack developer, and that can mean many different things depending on what the team is there to do. So I'll ask, let me ask Mitch maybe. I mean, Mitch, do you see the job term DevOps engineer show up as a actual job position that people are recruiting into?
Mark, I have occasionally, and usually what it's used for is sort of the narrow slice of DevOps of CI/CD, of someone that can come in and implement automated testing or continuous integration. That's because that's the starting point, or at least that's typically been, automating testing has been a goal, and now that's sort of fundamental to DevOps, right? Is to automate everything as much as possible.
Right.
So, but beyond that, I think it's very confusing. What's a DevOps engineer? And to your point, you talked about Agile. I think Agile is much better defined in terms of a common definition, but maybe it's because it's been around a little bit longer. DevOps is pretty loosely defined and an evolving thing. There's not one place to go to say, if you do these 5 things, you're a DevOps team or DevOps company. But I always ask myself the question of what's behind, why would you do that? Is it just sort of the next fad for IT? Is there really a benefit you're trying to achieve? And I think some of that confusion around DevOps also ties back to that. Is I always look at ultimately what's the business value we are trying to accomplish. Otherwise, who cares, right? If it's an IT metric, so what? I mean, maybe it's meaningful to IT, but why does it valuable to the business? So I think your point around being able to be as self-sufficient, et cetera, all lead to how do we get the right software out the quickest and give companies a competitive advantage through software. That's really what DevOps and Agile hopefully are there to ultimately deliver, at least in part. But that's I think why it's hard to find DevOps people, because it can mean a lot of things because everybody's a different place in their journey. If you're 5,000 person IT organization with huge investment in mainframe applications, but you're starting to venture into or maybe have some client, cloud native or containerized kind of applications, and this real mixed environment. How do you come together and create a DevOps strategy? Do you tie it all together? Does everybody work together? Do you do the same thing? Use the same tools? There's more questions than answers, I think, a lot of times. Not to make the problem unsolvable, but it's really kind of contextual dependent of each organization of what makes sense for them for where you are right now, and then where do we go from here, and how do we implement? How do we make that meaningful to us for DevOps? So kind of my long-winded answer, Mark. I don't know if that made any sense to you, but I'd love to hear from Jeff and Tom too. Your thoughts on
much of it in our world, and certainly in my world, kind of coming at it from a product development perspective, is more of a mindset. So we've driven agile transformation here at Micro Focus in the last few years, particularly in my product group. That mindset is around doing things over smaller things over shorter periods that eventually grow into big things. And it has the counterintuitive effect of driving actually up the predictability of outcomes. And I have this discussion with customers all the time. By moving and shifting to more of an agile mindset and agile delivery model, I can actually give you a lot more rigor around what my roadmap looks like, what the outcomes look like quarter over quarter, versus looking 18, 24 months over the horizon and trying to figure out where the developers will be then. And that resonates with customers. Also drives up our quality, right? So and part of the agile mindset is to do something and get it done, finish it off, make sure it works before you pass it on or move on to the next thing or pass on that component to somebody else to work on. DevOps to me is kind of the same thing. It's a mindset shift. So you go from thinking of the world in terms of, say, IT or software development, and what you have to become is part of the product team. So you're no longer part of a cost center running a business system as much as you're part of the product team, looking for the ways in which to deliver the product to the market most cost effectively, that delivers on the SLAs that you put in place for your customers, those kind of expectations. And I think that speaks to the challenge of finding the right person for those types of roles. Just to your point, you look for a full stack developer. I mean, we ran into a huge problem when I was running a company in Ireland a few years ago. Huge problem, outages with our primary customer because of a scale issue. The problem itself manifested in a bunch of different ways on the front end. Explosive use of APIs that we had predicted wouldn't be used at all, this kind of thing, right? And as you dug through it, you had to get into Cassandra at the time, and it was just, but there were really was only 1 or 2, 3 people at the company who understood the full end-to-end implications of how the whole system operated. And so from a software perspective, the full stack, and then the hardware that it was sitting on, right? And could put that together. One of our interim solutions was to throw a bunch of flash memory at the problem, which did help with the problem. But as a developer, you wouldn't necessarily think that way. As a DevOps engineer, if you will, you're definitely looking at the full stack and the full system to figure out how to optimize across that. Those are special people. They're very talented. And boy, oh boy, you want to hold on to them if you find one.
I would say there's a lot of, I agree with every comment there, but I would say there's a fair amount of job postings for DevOps engineers, but all the factors that you guys all talked about are why that's very difficult. I usually look at the DevOps engineer as the evangelist or as the person in the organization that's helping to deploy DevOps, not necessarily the person that's the front end or full stack developer that's executing in a front end shop. Trying to get your clients and yourselves to figure those things out in the job world is a big deal. So all of that words, it made me sit there to think. In 1989, I took a job. I was a database engineer was my title. And one of the other guys was an engineer. And he's like, you are not an engineer. And they changed my title to analyst, right? The point is, for 30 years, we've had this debate over titles and roles. So we could talk probably for the full 45 minutes on, is a DevOps developer and a front-end, full stack developer the same thing? We won't resolve that. I will say, though, that what I've seen over the 10 years or so of DevOps, it went from engineers and software.com type companies that could get their head around the core concepts and implement it without much legacy. They were a greenfield, if you will. They were able to go in. What we've seen now is this idea that these corporate entities, that for a enterprise, right, to go DevOps all in for everything in that corporate world, that their software and their customers are internal, right, more than they are external, et cetera. You know, now you're changing so much, right, and that adapting is what's causing a lot of that. And without a good definition, a consistent taxonomy, a lot of that's where they then start to struggle in the corporate politic. In my mind, it's clear the ability of DevOps and Agile, as we've said, to generate the ability to add business value faster in a more consistent and managed way is what it's all about. How do you go from cost to value? But we can all say that conceptually until we have to sit with the 500 people in our organization and the 12 different consulting firms that all have a different flavor of it in order to get to that same objective. And that's where the problems, start.
So I heard you say, I loved the contextual DevOps individual, or sometimes we call them the contextual DevOps human, right? To stay away from that loaded term of engineer, because Jeff, as you and I found out, we both are DBAs, and I was also a DBA analyst. I thought I was an engineer, but they downgraded me to an analyst. However, being an analyst for 15 years, I think that's not a bad title after all. So I heard you say contextual. I think that's great. I heard also, I loved the evangelist who actually takes on the mindset. I think, Tom, you said that, and Jeff, you said the same thing. So really trying to inspire the rest of the organization, because there is a significant culture change in how we do things, right, in that space. I heard about thinking of the whole thing as a product, really delivering that end-to-end perspective, but having empathy for all the different roles who are potentially part of that product team. So I want to leave that because I want to ask you for something else, which is near and dear to my heart, because I always get asked when I'm at events, what course should I take? What should I learn? What masterclass should I watch? What certification should I take? And there is a variety of different answers to that. So I'm curious. So Tom, when you guys hire, I'm sure you get into the conversations of that gentleman or that lady, the right person for our development of the next. I won't name the name of the product, but what do you look for? What are some of the skills you would say are absolutely must have?
Well, a couple of questions in there, Evelyn, but you know, when we're looking at hiring folks and looking at skill set, really what I'm looking for is, again, I come back to the mindset, the attitude towards things, right? So I want to see somebody who's really curious, right? We're looking for people who have a curiosity, a sense of interest in a variety of things, right? Rather than someone kind of getting locked into one specific area. And so as I'm looking at skill sets, I'm looking at people to hire, for example, in different roles. I'm really interested in people who are curious, who are interested in diving into something, who can bring a different set of perspectives to whatever challenge it is that we're going to throw at them. You know, when you come into even a role like mine, coming from the outside in allows you to bring sort of new, fresh perspectives and challenge the central beliefs of the teams. We made a transition to cloud native, bet on Kubernetes 4 or 5 years ago. Part of it, I mean, my CTO recommended going that way, and I had been doing some consulting with a startup before joining HPE, and they were all over it. I could see where developers were going, and it was a no-brainer. So bring that fresh perspective in, know that it's the right way to go, make the step and go. So when we're hiring, I like to see people that are curious, they're really interested in what we're trying to do. They don't necessarily have to have the background in IT ops management. I think you can learn that as you go, but you really need to have a curiosity and a willingness to just kind of roll up your sleeves, get in and do the work.
Cool. Other thoughts? Jeff, what do you see?
Well, I think it's an interesting, and I think I hear what Tom said there a lot, right? What we want is curious. We want people that can adapt. We want thinkers. Yet what we train to are languages and tools and environments, right? And so to that individual that's trying to figure that out, they get a certification in something, right? It doesn't mean they're creative and or thinkers and take on new things, right? And I think that's one of the real issues is we still need the skills. We expect the ability to know the languages and the tool sets, right? Those kind of things. And there is this practical experience that you can do over time. So we're sort of caught in all of that because it does take time. And if the process in your organization is still changing quite readily, and it's in itself adaptable, a lot of the core skill sets, you have to rethink how do they apply in that new process. And if I'm a consultant and I go from organization to organization, I might place a person in DevOps at company A and they go to DevOps at company B, and all of a sudden they can't be functional, right? And that's a real challenge. So I think it's this idea, we don't really know how to consistently define it. I'll go back to my story of the analyst, Evelyn, that you brought up, but we had these debates years and years ago. People wanted to only know, COBOL, and they only wanted to work in a mainframe. They didn't want to go to client server, and they were trying to decide how to build and evolve their career. And sometimes they had a long career in one thing and never did change, right? In today's world, that change is happening at a much different rate. It isn't every 3 to 5 years, it's every 3 to 6 months type thing. So I think there's a lot of complexity to the individual person trying to figure out how to evolve those careers. And I think we, to the broader technology community, can just work on continuing to refine that, continuing to give some structure to it, which is evolving and which is, I think, happening, which is needed for the corporate to really change.
Well, there's kind of an analogy here to the field of architecture. Like if you go to a major university and get a degree in architecture, they don't have classes in mechanical drawing. I mean, you got to go pick that up on your own someplace along the way. And I think the same is true in our profession. But you need to have some innate curiosity about how these tools work, and really kind of enjoy. It's almost a sense of personal satisfaction for the really good programmers. They love the challenge of mastering a new tool or a new language. And it's just one other reflection. It's interesting. In the old days, I don't know what that would be, maybe 10 years ago, we'll all remember the QA function was typically the first stage of a developer's career. Somebody would come out of school or have minimal experience. We'd put them on a QA team, and they'd start to see what software looks like, and there'd be bugs, and they get to fix maybe some of the more innocuous things, et cetera. And then once you got that level of familiarity, you'd kind of move up and become a junior coder or whatever the terminology would be, and then move through more levels of responsibility. But when you wrap it all together and you have like a DevOps person, there's no QA role by itself in a lot of organizations. You've got to come in and be able to do 12 other things at the same time. So it's more challenging, but by the offset of that is that people do get exposed to these tools a lot earlier, typically in their careers.
But I think you bring up a great point of how do we create a career path for individuals, right? Because the people that are running the shops are people like us that had a model that was a career path that isn't necessarily the same anymore. And so those individuals, we see it today, even a lot of people are trying to reskill because of COVID. You have a lot of people that are taking whatever that time is. We have a lot of organizations trying to help minorities and other type of groups get skills that they can then go be employed. But you need the entry level, you need the process by which to do that. And I think we're going to have to be thoughtful in what that looks like, and not just say, hey, you should be a DevOps engineer or you should be a whatever, because that probably isn't a nice path for that person that doesn't come with if you have a lot of these, data scientists or DevOps engineers, they're engineers or analysts today, with master's degrees in math, and they get taught things and they're innately curious and investigative, et cetera. And the challenge is now you're doesn't have that framework, and you want to make them teach them JavaScript and hope they can then go work in a development role in a DevOps shop. So those are some real challenges that are even more today than they were just a little bit ago.
I think part of what we're talking about, Evelyn, is this change from just like careers aren't a linear path anymore, right? Just like software is not a linear path anymore. I think we work in an environment where going to the curiousness that you talked about, Tom, it's this innate ability to learn and have a thirst for learning. And the higher thirst for learning people have, the more they're going to sort of step up in their career, take on the next thing, figure that out. So that's something that I look for. It's get away from the checkbox of do you have skill A, B, C, and D. Actually, I might need one of those. Like right now, I need to make sure you have that. The rest of it, you'll either learn or it'll change. In 2 years, we're going to be looking for that plus something else. So I hope I'm never going to find somebody that has all the stuff that I want for the role that I'm trying to put them into. So that can they learn it? Do they have a past history of demonstrating, especially if they've done it on their own initiative in some way? I've learned it at home. I learned it through, being part of meetups. I learned it through these community groups that I'm part of as a developer. That's, I think, the world that software has evolved to. Not everybody does that. We didn't do that earlier like everybody does today. But I find this interesting because in other domains, I'm working with people that come right out of school, master's degree or undergrad, And I'm shocked at how comfortable and how fearless they are with using tools. It's like, oh, I can learn that. I'll go figure that out. I did this is sort of a little bit of a tangent, but we did a focus group one time, and we were trying to figure out home services that we might offer. And some guy said that, yeah, I poured my patio myself. I'm like, you poured your own cement? How did you do that? How did you figure out you could do that yourself? I watched the YouTube video and it was 3 minutes. So I figured if it could be explained in 3 minutes, I could do it myself. And that's, I don't believe in career paths anymore. I believe in helping, coaching people achieve the next thing of where they want to go in their journey. Everybody has an individual journey. I don't think there's a career path for DevOps people. I think it's everyone's own path. And our role is to help people figure out, how do you achieve what you want to do now? And can we match that with where the organization is and needs? Or how do we create an opportunity? Or if it's not here, they're probably not going to be here 3 years from now. How can I help you get to the next thing and get the next person in? Right. So anyway, I think it's a much more fluid environment than certainly what I was used to when I started my career.
I agree. That's very inspirational, Mitch. The challenge lies that there's many leaders. Just if I look at here, sitting in Germany and the companies around me, very traditional enterprises where their leadership is not necessarily of the same mind. When I, for example, share with them the word holacracy, I think that's how it's said, which is exactly the model which says whatever I'm passionate about, whatever I think I can do, I go and do because I own my own career. If I want to be a DBA in whatever, MongoDB, or if I want to be an AI person or a EX or whatever, I take that and I go for that. Unfortunately, there is that clash between the traditional way of how, as Jeff used described, we lay out this career plan. There is vendors and communities who have certifications. We still have to get a master's. I have 2 daughters who are struggling, one in architecture, Mark, the other one in psychology, who say, Mom, what am I supposed to do now? I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do now? You got the degree, I paid for it, do something. But they are used to that thought that some there is that path, right? There is that. When I started at Hewlett Packard, I started as a programmer with a master's as a programmer because that was the career path. And so any ideas on how do we, besides saying we're the leaders, you guys are the leaders you're hiring, but it's only 4 of you. How can we spread that gospel besides this conversation we're having? So if you're listening in, this is the gospel. Be aware of that you need to change that mind. But how can CIOs do that in a way without or leaders without upsetting the entire company and HR and the CEO and the revenue and everything else? Any tips?
Well, I think part of it for me is get to know the people on your team. Those are the most, you're going to impact them directly. And so I can give you an example. A woman on my team was running my business ops. She's an absolute rock star. And she was getting bored, frankly, after many years of this. And so the discussion centered around, well, I've got, a few projects like this I want to get going. One of them was really around what we call now DocOps, leading into what are we doing, from a DevOps perspective, but really driving DocOps and getting to a modern self-help approach to our product documentation, our product support, that sort of thing. And she just stepped right into it and took it on with gusto, right? And it allowed her to kind of carve out something new and interesting to do on her journey. She's done it so well. Of course, we promoted her and all of that, right? But it's getting to know the people that you work with, the teams that you work with, and then encouraging that same model to be passed on down through the organization. Look, we're in a unique time, right, where the people working for us know more about their jobs than we'll ever know about them. Mm-hmm. And so you really are depending upon, the folks around you to drive, and it's more important now than ever, I think, for leadership to set a vision, set a direction, and then work with your team to drive to that vision in that direction, right? And you do that with your team now. You get the buy-in, you build it, you work it, and then you drive to it. But you're depending on people who are far more experts in these various areas that you depend on to actually be successful to do it. So I think you get to know your people, you get to know the environment, but then, as I said, very important to be able to set a vision and a direction, put the right incentives in place, and then help people follow the pet journey that they want to follow to get there.
So
I would agree with Tom there. And from the IT perspective, all of that's true, right? I guess I would have always said, as an IT person, we're always pushing the string up a little bit as an IT to the business owner, right? To that, what is that business person that's wanting value? They looked at us as cost, right? So you guys can, whatever you need to do, Tom, you guys do it. But you can't spend more, you can't have more, et cetera. What's happening though, and it's been happening over the last 5 to 10 years, is this concept of IT is a driver of value and a driver of growth, not a manager of value and a manager of growth. I think COVID has done nothing but accelerate that transformation, right? I mean, and so it's been happening. Cloud is not a new thing, but cloud even more is accelerating. Digital, if it's not bolted down, it's going digital. And a lot of those things would have been done except for funding and or buy-in and or, industries that use it regulatory as an excuse for not doing that. All of those excuses are now past, right? And to be honest, we'll probably do 5 years of transformation in the next 2 years or 1 year, right? So I think we may get what we hope for, but not then be prepared for what it is that's expected of us, right? Because we're still playing the games of we've used 20 different tools and we don't have a defined set of skills and we don't have a strategy, those kind of things. So those are real problems for us to deliver, but I think the business is now going to expect us to do that.
I heard you say servant leadership, I think, is, Tom, what I think you discussed. I love that. Yeah. I remember doing some research at Forrester at the time. And Jeff, to your point, I wanted to share a story I just discussed with a gentleman who has a very large IT organization in New York City. Of course, in 4 weeks ago or so, within a matter of days, they had to transform their entire organization to move outside into their home offices because of the pandemic. And he was saying things which didn't happen before, the kind of collaboration, the kind of empathy, the listening, the servant leadership, all of those, soft skills, or sometimes I call them human skills or core skills, were there in their people, but they never really had that time to express because they were so enthralled with the latest tool of whatever DevOps platform they are going to buy or they're going to exchange or whatever else. And so in that crisis mode, they shifted into this backup mode of really connecting and really understanding who they are, which almost brought me to tears because he said in 2 days, all of them were in their back office, in their home offices, and they were just heroes. And so that made me think of what you were saying, Jeff, that we finally, as IT folks, we're no longer technologists per se, we're actually business partners and business technology enabling and helping. So that was great. Any other thoughts on what we just talked about? We have a few more minutes. We can maybe 2 more minutes. Any other thoughts? Mitch, you look like you have a thought. I can see that.
No, I think the point around the acceleration of this that Jeff you're bringing up, and Tom and you talked about, Evelyn, is what I've heard is how when we have to make a decision, we can make one. Like, what collaboration tool are we going to use? How are we going to do our remote meetings? All of a sudden, when you have to make a decision, got to get something done. That sense of urgency can bring people together and get things done. And I think that's one of the shockers to the folks outside of IT is how come we've been debating what collaboration tool, Slack or Teams, for the last year, but we suddenly in a week can have it implemented. How do I get that to happen every week, right? So because we need to operate at that pace. So I think there's some introspection that's worth, yes, it's because we're forced up against the wall. We got to do something quick. Let's go get it done. But what did you do in that situation? You might be able to bring back to kind of regular everyday life. The other thing to add into is organizations are definitely accelerating their digital projects, their transformative projects. And one of the reasons is when things get disrupted, when the cards kind of get thrown up in the air. You remember that game 52 card pickup? We kind of throw them all on the floor, and then the other person realizes the joke and they got to pick them up. That's kind of the rules get rewritten, and supply chains have been broken. They're not going to be reassembled the same way, but they're also going to be driven by different kinds of strategies. Cisco and the housing crisis of 2008, for example, chose to, rather than having specialists and having 3 or 4 that do a certain kind of products, they wanted a handful of manufacturers that could do any number of projects around their optical equipment or whatever type of equipment. So they've got a lot more flexibility in their strategy for supply chain. I think that's how we need to think about software. It isn't that we want people to be fungible and just kind of they're here, gone, whatever. It is about, it's a people business, and it's all about the EQ, right, of how we work with people. They themselves are going to be moving in and out. We don't have 10, 20, 30-year careers at companies anymore. That's how folks expect to live. And I think that's how they're going to continue to live. So I think we can, instead of saying, well, why doesn't it work the way we want it to? Let's take the way people want to work and adapt that to how we need to get things done. And that's where hopefully there's some magic sauce that we can make happen.
Magic sauce is good. Before I turn it over to you, Mark, because I know you have a thought, for all of you, I would like to end with all of you saying one word, just one word, which is near and dear to our conversation. So while Mitch, Tom, and Jeff get to think about it, Mark, you always have quickly a word, but anything to what Mitch just said, and then we'll go to the one word and we'll wave goodbye. Oh, I now know why people are waving. Sorry, Mark. People are waving because when you leave a meeting, you kind of get up, physical meeting, you get up, you kind of grab your stuff into, and you kind of slowly walk out, and people are seeing that you're leaving. Well, in a Zoom or in a digital virtual meeting like that, it's like Mitch pushes the button and we're done, which is why we're all waving, because that means we're kind of saying goodbye. That's research-based. All right, Mark, any last thoughts? And then we'll go to the last word, and then we'll wave goodbye.
Okay. So, well, one thought came up when Mitch was talking. I think one of the things we've all learned is how resilient and adaptable our teams are. I mean, it's a really kind of remarkable how people have soldiered through and done things and delivered things, and completed things that are beyond what normal expectations would be. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I said, maybe we need more drama in the workplace. Maybe we need to create these incredible feats of unbelievable challenge. That people
chaos monkey.
And if you think about it, that's what happens with a lot of the startups. So the startups, maybe you've got initial customer that wants to see a certain feature added to the product. Maybe you're coming up on a funding round. Maybe your VCs are looking for you to be able to show a 100% increase in sales relative to a prior quarter or a year ago. And so the gun's kind of always at your head, and you celebrate these accomplishments as you go along. And, I just think in larger companies where things move a little more lethargically, maybe people need to get a little more creative about introducing drama into the workplace, which is something, you wouldn't normally hear prescribed, but it seems to have had a very, very positive effect in our current situation. So with that, I'll yield to the word round.
Now you get to think, well, let's start with you, Mitch. What's your one word? Remember, I say one. The focus is on the one.
I always go back to everything happens with people. It's always about people. We like to think it's other things. Nothing happens without people. So how do we help our people succeed? So that to me is the word I go back to.
People. Good one. Tom, you got one? You can pass to Jeff if you don't have one. But
No, it's okay. I like because part of the theme of this has been people, process, tools, which we talk about. So I appreciate what Mitch is saying. So I actually, the word I like right now is inflection, or 2 words, inflection point. I think we're living through one of the most exciting times of our lives. And I got to live through the whole, internet coming alive in the 90s, and I happened to be at Sun then, and it was an incredibly exciting time. Right now, what we're going through, I mean, our developers, we track them, like you guys were saying, we track them worldwide. They haven't lost their velocity. In fact, they're doing better. And in many ways, when you survey them, their quality of living has gone way up. Okay, and frankly, we've got folks, working out of home offices they've crafted in their garages, but their quality of life is going up. The intimacy that we have with our colleagues today, you're all sitting in my home office, right, is higher than it's ever been, despite the fact that we're not really face to face. I think this is a major inflection point in terms of how we live and the quality of our lives going forward. And we'll come out of this. I mean, we're already looking at optimizing property, all of this sort of thing, because I like working this way. It seems a lot of people like to work this way, and it seems we're every bit as productive as we were. So this is, to me, a really, really interesting point in history, actually.
Great, thank you. Jeff?
We use a word, the leader of who I report to, she often talks about, having pride in what we've done and where we're going. I think I can tie it to a lot of the inflection, being curious, right? But, the ability to do all the things that have happened and set yourself up to be thoughtful going forward. I think we should take a moment to, as organizations and individuals, be proud of what we've accomplished and, use that as motivation for what we can then do, going forward.
Beautiful. All right, Mark.
So I'm gonna close this out with the word opportunity. And there are many different kinds of opportunities that have presented themselves because of this current situation. I have a good friend here in the Bay Area who's a CMO. He's working from home and he has two girls. I think they might be in junior high or something like that. So they have family lunches every day. He said, I would have never had lunch with my kids. That's like an unheard of, and they actually talk, at lunch. So it's not the end of the day when everybody's exhausted and has activities to go participate in. So, from a parenting point of view, there's some opportunities. From a skills development point of view, we've talked about this, and the skills are never static. People should be exploring that. Then at a business level, I think there are some smart people out there, and this kind of an situation we're in, they're looking around at adjacent spaces or competitors. I mean, don't think that Hilton's not looking at what Marriott's doing on their website or scraping prices off of Sky Blue's commuter, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So people are, the smart people that have the resources will find this to be, you look 2 or 3 years from now and there'll be some people that'll point back at this and say, we could have never gotten to where we are today if we hadn't used that as an opportunity.
Excellent. Fantastic. I have one too. Mine is just empathy, which I think is very much infiltrated through what you guys said. Gentlemen, this has been really, really good. I'm an honor to share the screen with you, I should say. Thank you very, very much. I hope we will screen again together at some point. Have wonderful days. Journey to your kitchen for the cup of coffee or in the garden for a glass of cocktail this evening, which is what I'm going to have because it's 7 o'clock. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to talk to all of you. Learned a bunch.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Okay, thanks very much, Mitchell. All right, our next segment is another one of the reoccurring segments that we have here on TechStrong TV, and this one is called Jane Explains. If you've caught some of the previous ones, you know that it's my partner, Jane Grohl, who's the CEO founder of the DevOps Institute. And Jane picks a subject every other week, and she does a little bit of a deep dive in it. It's usually subjects you probably have heard of, you may not be intimately familiar with, or maybe you are. But Jane gives her spin on them and tries to make it comprehensible for people. So here's Jane Grohl with Jane Explains.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everyone. It's Jane Grohl, and welcome to another segment of Jane Explains. I've invited you today to my campsite in Fort Myers, Florida, where we're going to pretend to sit outside and talk about a topic that's particularly important to the success of digital transformation, DevOps, agile software development, and practices like site reliability engineering. And that influences culture. You hear a lot mentioned about culture and cultural improvement, cultural transformation, successful organizations that have successfully transformed their culture. And I think all that's great. But I also think sometimes that we approach culture as if it's something that we can surgically remove and replace with a new culture by surgically attaching something, or by mandating it, or by waving a magic wand, or by bringing in lots of automation, or bringing in a process framework. And while all of those are contributors to a good corporate culture, the reality is corporate cultures are shaped by people. And people with good human skills, we used to call those soft skills, are really going to be the influence around your corporate culture, because corporate culture is something that's shaped by human behavior. And those humans could be senior management humans, they could be business humans, they could be developers, they could be operations folks, they could be security folks, they could be any and all of the above. But it is how people behave in an enterprise environment that's really going to shape culture. And as you probably know, people don't change easily. People don't adopt new behaviors easily. There has to be certainly a what's in it for me, but there also has to be something that's communicated, some benefits that are shared goals with the organization, or certainly shared accountabilities within the team. And one of the reasons DevOps in particular shapes itself around cultural principles is because all the automation, all the mandates, all the process frameworks, all of that is not necessarily going to result in a new culture. So let's talk about culture first, and then let's talk about human skills. And hopefully, if you're in the mindset, regardless of what your role is, for adopting a new way of working in your organization, looking at DevOps, trying to figure out what are the key elements to DevOps, then I think this is an important conversation. And I hope you come out of this maybe not only with a new way of behaving, but a new way of thinking. So the dictionary definition of culture is the social and psychological aspects of work. Now think about that. Right? Social, you have a very social relationship within your organization. It may be with your colleagues. It may be with members of other teams, right? Generally, you spend more time with the people at work than you do even with your own family. And so it doesn't mean you have to go out for beers or tea, or you don't need to know about each other's personal details, but there is a social element that humans like about work. And these days, when many of us are working from home, working remotely, we have to work a little bit harder at that social element. You might have seen on social media channels that some individuals and organizations are hosting virtual happy hours or virtual meetups or virtual lean coffees, as much for what the outcome of that is, but also to embrace social engagement. So one of the first ingredients in culture is social. The second ingredient is psychological. It really has a lot to do with how you feel about your work, how you feel about your success, how you feel about your progress, how you feel about your teammates, and how you feel about your career. There's a lot of emotion that goes into the psychology because it's how you think about where you work, who you work with, the work you're doing, and what your future growth path is. So when you take the cycle and the social and the psychological elements of culture, you realize that, first of all, those are really hard to automate, right? You can't necessarily automate the social side. Well, sure, you could do it with something like Zoom happy hours or Zoom, fun things, or wearing a funny hat to your next meeting. But you really can't automate social interactions, not in a classic way. Again, you can give people lots of opportunities to engage, but socialization is a human experience, right? It's a human endeavor. Same thing with psychological. You can't force somebody to think a different way, right? You can't force somebody to feel a different way. You can show them a path. You can give them the opportunity to experiment. You can open up doors so that they can walk through it. And yes, you may have to push them through that open door and help them to adapt to a new way of working. But at the end of the day, it is the human that's going to do that work. And so while DevOps looks at culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing as its core values, you notice that the first one is culture. Because until we have a psychologically safe culture, till we have inclusiveness, till we have empathy, till we have better collaboration, everything else that you think is associated with DevOps may give you a little bit of success, but it's not going to give you the long-term sustainable success. So don't think of culture as something surgical. If you're in a senior management position and you're listening to me today, don't think about automation as your pathway to DevOps success or to transformation. Don't think of culture as something that you can mandate, that require, and also that you can change very, very quickly. Cultural changes take time for people to internalize, to ask questions, to feel better about the culture that they're in. And of course, if they don't like the culture they're in, they always have the choice to leave. And certainly that is an option, but in today's very talent-strained market, I think a lot of organizations are working extra hard to make their culture something that is attractive to the talent that they need. Again, doesn't necessarily mean ice cream at 3:00 in the afternoon. It means making people feel proud. It means making people feel shared and valued, and to give them opportunities to learn and to really help grow them while they're helping to grow your business. And so again, very, very human aspect of it. The second part I want to talk about today is human skills. And I think I may have mentioned this before. DevOps Institute does an annual report. We're about to launch the next survey in a few weeks, and it's called Upskilling, the Enterprise DevOps Skills Survey, which ultimately the data is collected and results in the annual report. And if you want to read the report, you're welcome to go to devopsinstitute.com, become a member, and download the report. There's a lot of really great deep data included in that report. But one of the things I think that's really kind of risen to the top 2 years in a row as we've collected this data, analyzed it, and produced the report is that regardless of where you sit in an organization, human skills are considered as essential as technical and process skills. Now, as I said, we used to call those soft skills. And somehow there was a belief that you were either born with good soft skills or maybe you grew them as you went through your career, but it wasn't something that organizations could intentionally grow. And so when you hired people, you hoped to hire people that you felt would be a good fit, right? You might have heard that term, they were a good fit. or they have the right personality for, for our environment. And then that's all well and good, right? People do have natural personalities, but through this survey and through this report, we've identified that human skills, very specific human skills, are considered critical, must-have to DevOps adoption. Number one, collaboration, right? The ability to work with others, to solicit their input, to respect their expertise. Communication, the ability to make sure that whatever you're doing, other people are aware of, that there's a certain level of transparency and keeping others in the know. Systems thinking, empathy, right? All of those skills that if they don't come to you naturally, either because of nature or nurture, then it is something that organizations can focus on. And today's environment with a really strong emphasis on Black Lives Matter, diversity and inclusiveness, I think more than ever, particularly in an IT organization where historically we have not had as many diverse groups that have taken a career or that we've hired or brought in. It's more important than ever to really kind of do a self-assessment on your human skills, and as leaders to bring in education, peer-to-peer awareness, and of course diverse hiring in order for those human skills to really excel. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. I think the quality, the collective quality of human skills inside of an organization are the differentiator between a culture that will support adaptability, agility, call it DevOps, call it transformation, than one that is not. So again, can you train this? Yes, of course you can train this. Organizations that are bringing in training on unconscious bias, doing role playing, really examining empathy, where you do see the world through somebody else's eyes. Inclusiveness, where again, you solicit and you respect the input, the expertise, the knowledge of those that are around you, regardless of whether they are like you, and like you can mean a lot of different things, right? Or they're not. And we want that 360 degree. We want to have teams that have people of different backgrounds, people of different color, people of different technical skills, people of different business skills, because that really does help shape your culture as well. I think one of the greatest human skills is the ability to deal with conflict, right? To recognize, you're not always going to win. You shouldn't always win. And sometimes it's okay if other people have the right answer, that there's not competition, and that you feel like you're all in this together. So I'm going to leave you with a little bit of an analogy, and I really do, again, regardless of your role, if you're a developer, if you're an operations person, if you're a business person, if you're in senior management, regardless of your role, I really want you to look around. And today, looking around, you probably see one of my cats, right? Or, again, I'm looking around from a campsite, but really, examine your corporate culture. And think about what you personally, as an individual human, could do to help shape it into the culture that you want it to be. So the analogy, sports teams, right? On a sports team, everybody has a role. My son was a basketball player. So everybody knew what position they played, but they also knew how to interoperate as a team, right? They knew when to pass the ball. They knew when to shoot the ball. They knew when to rely on somebody else, right? They knew when to count on their team because they were all part of the same team. And I think that even when in sports, when you look at teams that are just so interconnected, their relationship with each other is almost telepathic. There's respect for each other. There's diversity in the makeup of the team. Those are the most successful teams. And not only are they successful once, they're successful time after time after time. So think of yourself that way and rule the universe, right? Think about what you can do to influence this culture. So today's talk is not about technical, right? Today's talk is not about, continuous delivery or site reliability engineering. And we'll get back to that. Next time, we're going to talk about observability. August is Observability Month. So it's important as you're moving through your career to recognize that these skills are important. Don't neglect them. Don't neglect them in your team. Don't neglect them in your organization. Okay, so August is coming up, and as I just said, we're going to declare August as Observability Month. So when I come back for my next Jane Explains, we're going to talk about observability, why it's trending as high as it is right now, and I invite you on August 20th to join us for DevOps Institute Skill Up Days, all about observability. Until then, stay well, be happy, and we'll see you soon.
Hey, thanks, Jane. Another great Jane Explains. Jane Explains will be back in not next week, the week after. She does those every other week, and we thank her for it. That's going to put a wrap on today's show for Thursday, July 30th. We hope you've enjoyed it. We try to give you 2.5, up to 3 hours a day of programming here on TechStrong TV. Of course, you can watch this on demand on TechStrong TV or on our OTT channels, Apple, Roku, Amazon Fire, on our DevOps.com mobile app. It's the DevOps.com app on the OTTs as well. Or you can catch individual segments as well as the whole show on Digital Anarchist, our video platform. But that's it for today, folks. We will be back Monday in a fresh month of August with our next show. We hope you have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay well, stay strong. TechStrong. This is Alan Schimmel. We're out.